Welcome to everyone watching. We are waiting until 7:30 arrives, which it has just done, so that we will not start until the advertised time. But it is 7:30, and welcome to the Monday, March 22nd, 2021 meeting of the Falls Church City Council. We will be joined later by our school board, so welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to now call the meeting to order and ask that our clerk read the virtual meeting notice, if she would be so kind.
Yes, thank you. This meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2-3708.2, and state and local legislation adopted to allow for continued government operation during the COVID-19 declared emergency. All participating members of City Council are present at this meeting through electronic means, and members of the public are welcome to view the meeting at www.fallschurchva.gov/council meetings and on FCC-TV, Cox 11, RCN 2, and Verizon 35. Public comments are accepted at cityclerk@fallschurchva.gov. Thank you.
Thank you. And will you now call roll, please?
I will if I can find it. Here we go. Just out of arm's reach. All right, Ms. Conley?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes, here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Here.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Here.
And Mr. Snyder? Oh,
Here.
and Mayor Tarter.
Here.
Thank you, Council.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And so now, if we can, there's the flags. If you'd be so kind as please rising wherever you might be and face the flag and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Thank you very much. And now it is time for the receipt of public comment. So why don't we go ahead and start, Madam Clerk, with written comments?
Yes, we do have written comments this evening. Nicholas Benton, president of Benton Communications Incorporated, asked that the city reinstate the city pages feature in the Falls Church News Press using stimulus dollars from the federal government. Jean Gresco supports decreasing the real estate tax rate to offset increased assessments. Marcia Hertzberg supports lowering the real estate tax rate. Andrew Olison asks that the city work with the residents to develop a comprehensive plan for Lincoln Avenue, comprising low-cost and pilot improvements in 2021 and 2022 in advance of the repaving schedule for 2023 in the CIP. He also asked that the installation of the planned wayfinding sign be delayed. The Board of Directors of the Village Preservation and Improvement Society requested that the City Council not authorize the full contract award resulting from the city's solicitation for wayfinding signs. Michael Chacum, unit owner in the Wesley, opposes changing the land use for the municipal parking lot to mixed use. Steve Callanan opposes changing the name of the high school. And that was all of our written comments.
All right. Is there any public comment?
Yes, we have Brian Creswick, who's here to speak, I believe, on the budget. And he has joined us for the meeting.
Sir, are you there?
Yes, Mayor Tarter. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing fine, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Absolutely. Thank you all for hearing my comments this evening. First, I'd like to thank members of council and the school board who have spoken with me about the school's plans and its budget for next year. In particular, I'd like to thank Ms. Downs and Mr. Lichtenhouse for their frequent and thoughtful feedback. I know budget discussions between council and the school board are difficult. However, I also know that we can have difficult discussions, politely disagree, and still be united in a common goal. I ask that council and the school board both continue to improve the school's proposed budget by ensuring the needs of our children come first. On March 8th, Dr. Noonan suggested, quote, "Listen to the silence as well as to the loud." I do not apologize for being noisy because my kids cannot advocate for themselves. And now I know I'm not alone. Over 93% of Mount Daniel and TJ families want their kids back in school full time, and high numbers are expected for Henderson and Mason as well. Our children need three things before you approve the budget this year. Three things. First, our children need a safe reopening as promised on April 6th. This is looking pretty good. I appreciate the hard work that everyone is putting into those preparations. But I do want to remind everyone that reopening is only part of the challenge that we face. Children need help recovering from the impacts of persistent virtual school. So number two, our children need a clear plan and commitment for summer learning. Our governor expects opportunities to be available for any child who wants it. I understand there are staffing concerns, but we as parents and our children need more than the rhetoric of a targeted approach. So please ask, who needs the help? Who wants the help? How are we going to staff and pay for it? The communications are silent, the budget is a bit vague, and many kids need this support. And number three, children will need continued academic, social, and emotional support next year. On March 8th, Dr. Noonan said, when we get into learning recovery, we may need additional funds. There is no communication for what parents expect, no plan from the schools on what will be planned or available, and no clarity in the budget on how to pay. Several of the 19 unfunded operating requests in the school budget could support recovery needs, but when $200,000 of savings were found, these savings were applied elsewhere. The school's budget has good intentions, but it allocates less than 17% of the increased funds for next year to address the impacts of COVID on our children. Less than 17%. This is unbalanced at best. And so in closing, before you approve the budget, I ask both council and school board again for these three things. First, reopen safely for every child every day, as promised on April 6th. Second, provide us a clear plan and commitment to expand summer learning. And third, provide a clear plan to support continued recovery next school year. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Madam Clerk, is there anyone else who wishes to speak at this time?
There isn't.
All right, well, thank you. So in just a moment, we're going to hear from the Urban Forestry Commission, their annual report. Before I do move on to that, I just want to make note, I know council's aware of this, but City Council did provide a statement on Friday in solidarity with the Asian American community, and particularly as it relates to some of the rhetoric and violence we've seen in past days. And so I want to also thank Councilwoman Hardy for her leadership in this role, and just make note of this again. And I don't know if there's anything you wanted to say at this time, Councilwoman Hardy, but I just would give you the opportunity if you have interest.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say that I was proud to be part of a council that spoke so firmly in support of this. So thank you all.
All right. Well, thank you again for your leadership. So let's move on now to the report of the Urban Forestry Commission.
Mayor, I actually had a council request.
Okay, sure. That's actually next on the agenda after the Urban Forestry report. You're welcome to make it now if you'd like, but it's actually the last item on item 5.
I will wait. Thank you.
All right. So who's here from the Urban Forestry Commission?
Kathy Philpott Costa. I'm the chair of the Urban Forestry Commission.
Yeah, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Good to see you. And I know you guys have been busy. It's been a busy year for you all, and I think a busy one coming up. So we look forward to hearing what you guys have been up to.
Good. I'm just going to make a few minutes of statements because you do have my report in front of you, and you know, it has more details than I can provide tonight. But Mayor Tarter and members of the City Council, thank you for including us in the agenda tonight. I want to first acknowledge that we had a year of change, not just because of COVID like everyone else, but because we had a couple of losses. We lost our arborist, Kate Reich, to retirement. And of course, we lost council member Dan Z. And those were two big losses because they were great advocates for us. But on the positive side, We have quickly established a productive working relationship with the acting arborist, Charles Prince, who is here tonight, and also with our new council liaison, Ross Litkenhouse. So I just want to thank them both for jumping in quickly and getting up to speed and supporting us. Like I said, I'll refer you to our written report for more detail, but I want to just quickly highlight a couple of gains, a couple of losses from last year, and our goals for this year. On the positive side, I have to say, most of you will recall we had a very productive work session with City Council this last year to brainstorm ways to preserve the mature trees in the residential context. And I am quite optimistic that these discussions will lead to some concrete improvements. The Urban Forestry Commission also successfully advocated for 18% tree canopy and good green space in the West Falls Church development, and this far exceeds green space and canopy in most recent developments, namely West Broad and Founders Row, so we deem that a success. Also, the West End Small Area Plan includes our recommendations for minimum tree canopy and open green space goals in large developments that are 5 acres and more. And this is the first small area plan in the city to have these kinds of goals. On the less positive side, we were disappointed with the amount of green space and tree canopy in the Broad and Washington project. There is very little publicly accessible green space, and communications with the developer were challenging during that project. This project illustrates the challenges we continue to have in advocating for the urban forest in special exception projects, simply because there are no minimum standards for us to lean on. And so looking forward, if I can highlight a couple of major things, I'd like to first model our productivity with council last year on the residential side and transfer that over to the commercial, special exception, and mixed use side. We hope this year to schedule another work session with council to discuss minimum standards for commercial, mixed use, and special exception projects. In fact, under the comp plan, the new comp, chapter 5 of the comp plan, these kinds of minimum standards are an explicit city goal. The Urban Forestry Commission is doing its part to research standards in surrounding jurisdictions and come up with reasonable recommendations, and we'll then discuss them with planning staff and reach out to the council in the hopes that we can schedule something this year to talk about these kinds of things. We'll also continue to advocate for mature tree protections on residential properties, and we're quite optimistic about the momentum here. In addition to some potential positive changes at the state level that might lead to some additional local flexibility on mature tree preservation, we also see that the Stormwater Task Force is looking at green infrastructure and tree solutions as part of its overall stormwater strategy recommendations. So we do see some good momentum there. We will also continue to work with other groups that have related goals in the city, such as the Environmental Sustainability Council, VPIS, Parks and Recs, and of course the schools, and we hope to do some more educational outreach this year. And last but not least, with the help of Charles Prince, we are close to finding a memorial tree site for Councilmember Dan Z. We're working in collaboration with his family and other interested stakeholders to make sure that this is going to work for everyone and everyone's comfortable with it. And I hope we do have some news on that front soon. So with that, I'll close, and please let me know if you have any questions.
All right. Well, indeed we do. Thank you for the good work that you and your commission have done this past year. You guys, I know, have been very vocal and very active, and it's certainly, I think, benefited our community. So we're quite pleased with that. And as you mentioned, Dan Z, I would just note that Friday is Dan's birthday. And so if you all could remember Dan and Elizabeth, particularly on that day. But anyway, so Mr. Duncan has his hand up. He's first. Let's start with him. Phil?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you just remind me where we are on the Fellows property and the analysis of the tree coverage there and what we're going to do going forward?
Yeah, Ross might have a better update than me, Councilmember Litkenhouse, but the Urban Forestry Commission was apprised of some ideas there, and we supported the idea of maintaining the canopy as much as possible, putting in maybe additional native plants and keeping the ones healthy that are there. And there's also a potential plan for urban agriculture, which we thought was compatible with all of the urban forestry goals we had. So I'm not sure where that is right now, but that was the last we heard about it. And we are prepared to support that kind of plan if that's what goes forward.
Okay, great. That's obviously going to turn out to be probably one of the bigger green space measures that we've undertaken in recent years here. So thanks for your interest and work on that.
Yeah.
All right. Other questions, comments?
I'd like to make a couple comments.
Of
Mayor
course, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Thank you. So, Kathy, it's been an absolute pleasure having the opportunity to work with you guys. I think you've just done great work, and I don't want the major wins that you showed in your report to be understated here. I think that those are huge wins. The change to the small area and comprehensive plans, and to your points on 2021 goals around residential development, tree canopy preservation, or mature tree preservation, as well as mixed use development. I think now that we have that foundation, it should make it much easier for us to accomplish those 2021 goals. So thank you there. Phil, to your question on Fellows property, shortly before and then at the beginning of COVID, there was a tremendous amount of activity between UFC, Parks and Rec, and the ESC around the Fellows property. I feel that the collaboration has been really good because there have also been some other stakeholder groups, friends of Fellows, that have been involved in this conversation. So between UFC, Charles, myself, Stacy Evers, it's part of ESC, as well as Rec and Parks, who technically the development and delivery of that is under their domain. I feel really good about it. I think where it was last left, and why I can speak to this, is that there's a resource and, of course, a money and timing issue. But my understanding is where it stands right now is preservation of the property in the truest sense. And Kathy's right with some native plantings, and we have talked about a place to put an urban ag feature, but to disturb it as little as possible while enhancing what I would say the tree cover and the native plantings there. So I think more to come on that, but it has certainly come a long way just over the last year. And then Kathy, the last thing I'll say is thank you guys for continuing, and Charles as well, to continue to find opportunities to memorialize Dan in ways that I think are very, very fitting for him. And I think that would just leave a really great legacy that speaks to his interests and passion here in the city. So thank you guys. I've truly enjoyed serving as your liaison. It really has been great. Thank you.
Thanks, Ross. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Snyder.
Sure. Thanks a lot for all the work. I am interested in your recommendations for special exception projects and migrating more of the urban forestry into those projects. So whenever you have anything to share with us, please bring it to our attention. I think you've hit on an important topic. So thank you again for all the work, and any thoughts you have about standards moving forward would be much appreciated. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Any final questions for Kathy? All right. If not, I'm going to thank you once again, and we greatly appreciate your fine work and look forward to more to come. So thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, Mayor Tarr.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to council requests. And if I could just make note that we have a very busy agenda. We have school folks who've already joined us now, and that will follow our regular meeting is the work session with the school board. But we do have a lot on the agenda tonight, so I just sort of ask that if folks can keep that in mind, it'd be much appreciated. But now we're moving on to council requests. So any council requests, Ms. Hardy, you had one?
I did. I wanted to call out the very detailed letter we got from our Lincoln Avenue residents and make a request to the city manager to actually pull out some of the near-term items. I think specifically to work with the residents on some short-term things that could be done to help with Lincoln in advance of the paving work and the potential CIP project down the line. That might be actually a good CACT and staff discussion, and we can come back and discuss budget implications.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Shields. You've received. You got
I'm
that?
sorry, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to comment on that as well. I think I misinterpreted some of that letter from Lincoln Avenue, and as far as the wayfinding signs, they were actually requesting the addition of some welcome signs in the median of Lincoln Avenue near the Arlington border to be added to a later phase of the wayfinding sign project. I just wanted to make sure their comments were clear to you all.
All right, thank you very much. Any other council requests? All right, if not, we're going to move on to the report of the city manager, which I believe this evening will be mostly or entirely taken up by Colin Brody, who's going to give us an update on COVID efforts here in Falls Church and the greater Fairfax area. But let's go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Shields. Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Brody for a report from the Fairfax County Health District, and he'll give us an update on vaccination, as well as an update just on any other health measures that we should be aware of. He does not have a presentation tonight. He's prepared to just speak, or no slides, I should say. He'll just speak to give a brief relay of the latest information and then answer any questions that the council has. So, Mr. Brody, thank you so much for your ongoing service to the community and to the city, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Okay, thank you. Just before, Mr. Brody, before you begin, this is David Tarter. Thank you for joining us. But I would just ask if anyone is not speaking. It looks like we're getting some feedback. So if you're not speaking, please mute your computer monitor. But Mr. Brody, thank you so much. You came before. It's been several months. At least, and it was quite informative and useful to our constituents. So welcome back, and let us know what you have to say.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. So I'm going to divide my remarks or my initial presentation kind of in half, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that may come up. So first, I'll touch on the epidemiology side of COVID, just to give a quick update on where we stand with numbers. So today, we reported 119 new cases of COVID within our health district, which brings the total since the beginning of the pandemic to 70,860. In addition, our percent positivity rate, so the percentage of COVID tests coming back positive for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, is 5.1%. The WHO, as many of you know, has set a target of 5.0% as an indication that there is sufficient surveillance going on to detect new cases. We have been lower than 5.1 in the past, particularly in the fall prior to the spike around the holidays. But that number has been declining over the last few weeks. On the contact tracing front, we are able to reach 87.1 of our cases and 70.2% of our contacts, and those numbers are improved from the wave of new cases we had over the holidays. On the hospital side, 281 beds within Northern Virginia, and we look at Northern Virginia as a region when we talk about hospitals, because each hospital has different capabilities. Within our region, 281 are occupied with patients who have been diagnosed with COVID-19. 40 of those are in the ICU, and of those, 25 are on ventilators. Shifting over to the vaccine front, this is the light at the end of the tunnel, which everyone has been talking about. So here in the health district, we have received a total of 290,853 doses since the vaccination campaign began. Last week, we received 43,454 first doses, and those are of the vaccine we received from the state. We have to take the number of second doses off the top and administer those, and then whatever the remainder is becomes the amount we can use on first doses. So last week we received 43,454. However, due to our ability to extract 7 doses from some vials, as well as some extra vaccine we had from the week before, we were actually able to administer 48,102 first doses within the health district. So that is a sign of great progress. We right now, as of a couple of hours ago, we have 91,632 people who are on our wait list for vaccine, and that wait list is, again, separate from the Virginia Department of Health system. And in Fairfax Health District, we have found success in using our own system to pre-register people for vaccine and invite them for appointments. The total cumulative number of people who have entered the wait list is 359,000. So when you look at those numbers, over 2/3 of those who have submitted interest in receiving a vaccine have been invited already. And we recognize that we have a long way to go, but these are encouraging signs that our supply of vaccine and the number of vaccination partners we have within the health district continues to increase little bit each by week. In Falls Church, just for the specific locality data, there are 3,475 residents of Falls Church, or at least of people who report a Falls Church resident when they get vaccinated. 3,475 have at least one dose, and 1,878 are fully vaccinated. Stepping back to look at the whole health district, we have about 252,000 people within our health district who have at least one dose, and 134,000 are fully vaccinated. And in our health district, we have about 1.19 million people that the Fairfax County Health Department serves across Fairfax County, Fairfax City, Falls Church, Herndon, and Vienna. A couple of items, and then I'll open it up to questions. We have an update on the in-home vaccine program. So this is a program that's designed for individuals in our health district who are unable to leave their homes in order to be vaccinated, but are eligible under age or underlying condition categories. This is a partnership between the Fairfax County Health Department and the Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Department. And so we have paramedics who are trained vaccinators, and they are able to visit homes every week in order to vaccinate people in their home, which is safer for them, for the resident, and then also allows them to receive vaccine when otherwise they would not have been able to make it to one of our vaccination sites. So we have completed 180 of those vaccinations. We have 88 pending, and then we have 17 scheduled to be complete this week. And those teams, multiple teams, go out multiple days a week, and they each vaccinate enough residents before the vial is expired. And so for Pfizer, you have about 6 hours per vial in order to use it. And so the teams go out, and in 6 hours, they're able to vaccinate individuals with the doses that are in the vial. We also have an equity vaccine strategy. So this is looking at some of the data around who has been vaccinated so far. And while we've made tremendous progress overall, there is a concern that we are missing people who may not have access to technology or may not have time off from work in order to be able to make it to a clinic. And so we are conducting targeted vaccination clinics in partnership with Safeway and some of our vaccine partners across the health district in order to provide more convenient and local vaccination campaigns. And so those are partnerships with our federally qualified health centers, the Adams Compassionate Healthcare Network, pharmacies that are receiving vaccine either through allotments from the Federal Pharmacy Partnership or from the Fairfax County Health Department. We have mass vaccination sites operating by both the health department and partners like Nova and George Mason University. And then there are additional private providers that are coming on each and every week in order to increase the number of vaccinations performed in our health district. I will pause there, and I'm happy to answer any questions or clarify anything I've said.
Great, thank you so much. Our first question is from Mr. Snyder, followed by Ms. Hardy.
Sure, thanks a lot. Colin, thank you for your work and everyone involved. What is the volume of vaccines that you're getting now on a weekly basis? What do you need, and what are your capabilities to administer the vaccinations, and what is the gap between the two? Number one. Number two, at the current rate, when would everyone who wants to be vaccinated be able to be vaccinated based upon the current rate? And then what should that rate be? Thank you.
Absolutely. So to the first question about what is the capacity, our capacity increases every week. Right now across the health district, we are in somewhat of a equilibrium in terms of the number of vaccines that we're able to administer and the number of vaccines that we are receiving every week. Part of this is due to the demand for individuals who are certified and licensed to vaccinate. As you can imagine, these nurses are in pretty heavy demand, and the state is working to expand eligibility for who can vaccinate. There's legislation that came out of Richmond that is being worked through to allow, for example, dentists and dental hygienists to vaccinate under an emergency authorization from the Virginia Department of Health. That program is not online yet. It should be online later this week or next week. And so that will allow us to potentially increase capacity. In addition, we have healthcare providers that operate within Fairfax Health District that are interested in vaccinating but may not have the requisite equipment in order to do it. And so we're working with them. We have a team within the health department that works with those providers in order to provide those vaccines. So right now, we receive, to answer your immediate question, we receive about 60,000 doses total. And we, again, take the amount of second doses that are coming due that week, we administer those, and then we open up appointments for the rest of them. So we're able to use the amount we have right now, but each week as we add more vaccination partners, we're going to need to add more vaccine. And so there was a regional letter from the NVRC that was sent to Richmond to basically request on behalf of all the districts more vaccine every week in a stepwise fashion so that we're able to consume the vaccine that we receive over the course of time. One of the biggest game changers for us here in Northern Virginia and within Fairfax is our partnership with Innova. And so next week, Innova will go live with their Stonebridge location, which is on Eisenhower Avenue in Alexandria. And that location is able to vaccinate between 6,000 and 12,000 people per day. And so at the beginning, when the vaccinations are in the 6,000 range, we would be able to provide that much vaccine from Fairfax and the surrounding jurisdictions. But when they are able to surge up to potentially 12,000 per week, there's not enough vaccine. And that doesn't include partners like George Mason and the 19 private healthcare providers that are vaccinating within the health district. So we definitely need more vaccine at the moment. We are working to bring on more vaccinators. And so we're in a bit of an equilibrium.
All right. Is that your response? It was seemed thorough to me, but I wasn't sure if you got everything. Mr. Brody?
That was all the comments that I have on the subject. But Mr. Snyder, if there's more to the question, let me know, and I'm happy to respond.
I did have a second question, which was based upon current and projected vaccination volume. When can everyone in the district that wants to be vaccinated expect that they can be?
Yes, I apologize. The federal government has set a deadline of sorts for states and localities to open eligibility to all adults by May 1st. Here in Fairfax, we anticipate being ahead of schedule on that front, so we hope to be able to expand to all eligible adults, which is what we call phase 2, before May 1st. We don't know exactly how close we'll get because there's a bit of an unknown with the number of individuals who are going to seek vaccination in the remainder of the phase 1B categories and then the phase 1C categories. But we're anticipating that we would certainly meet the presidential directive for May 1st. In terms of how long it will take to vaccinate everyone who would like to be vaccinated, right now we're seeing increase in vaccination increase every week. Some of the initial guidance or modeling was around about 70% nationally, and that number increases every week. And obviously here in Fairfax, we have incredible appetite for vaccination. So it would take us many weeks after the May 1st eligibility date to actually get vaccine out. But part of our goal is to be able to have vaccine more readily available in primary care offices. And so that includes getting vaccine like Johnson & Johnson, which many private providers indicate is easier to handle in their preferred method. But we just we're not receiving Johnson & Johnson at this point within the state. So once we are able to do that, we will be able to open up to more private providers and then be able to clear the backlog. Because when we open on or around May 1st for phase 2, we anticipate significant demand. And so we're going to have a situation in which people will have to wait their turn. But we hope that it's not as long as some people waited for the very early days of vaccination.
So one other question, is there anything that we here can do to A, support your efforts, and B, increase capacity and move the schedule more aggressively forward.
Yes, one of the actions already taken was the joint letter from NVRC to the state asking for additional vaccine allocation, as well as what we call a community vaccination center, or a CVC. Having a CVC in Northern Virginia would allow, or more specifically in Fairfax Health District, would allow for thousands more vaccines to be administered each day, and that would not pull from existing resources. So these would be sites that operate on a state contract with state resources and then limited local support, particularly around traffic control and things like that. So if we were able to stand up a CVC here in the Fairfax Health District, that could be thousands more a day. And so the wheels are turning on that. There's no action required at this point, but the letter from NVRC certainly assisted us in helping to move that along.
Okay, so thank you. Please let us know if there's anything we can do. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right, Ms. Hardy, followed by Ms. Hiscott.
Great. Thank you, Colin, for joining us and giving up another evening again. I appreciate that you started with epidemiology, because clearly I think COVID is still very much a thing here. In fact, I think in the city, we actually just had our 10th death. So I wanted to make sure we all knew that that was a pretty solemn thing that we had hit. I think I saw news reports that some states are actually seeing increased positivity. So after some weeks of lowering, some concerns about that. Do we think that in Northern Virginia that the vaccination rate is outpacing kind of the virus and its variants?
That's an excellent question. Right now, we are seeing pretty strong adherence to the public health guidelines from members of our community. We've seen this, I think I mentioned this at a previous meeting, that things like mask compliance in Northern Virginia are quite impressive. So we're not seeing the kind of broad relaxation that other states, for example, Texas, that kind of went from 0 to 60 in terms of releasing mask guidelines and things like that. We are not seeing that kind of approach here. We have a more reasoned approach to communicable disease control. So we are very hopeful that we will be able to open up kind of surgically where we can and where we can do it within CDC guidance, while also accelerating the rate of vaccination so that we are able to reopen the way that is best for our community, while also getting people vaccinated. And I would add that part of the vaccination success lies on not just two types of vaccine, so not just the Pfizer and Moderna that require 2 doses spaced weeks apart, but also Johnson & Johnson that is a single dose. And once you're vaccinated and 2 weeks have passed, you are considered fully vaccinated, which for Pfizer, that's 3 weeks between doses plus an additional 2 for antibodies to build. And then for Moderna, it's 4 weeks between doses plus an additional 2 for antibodies. So having additional vaccine manufacturers on the market and in our health district will help us stay ahead of variants and just spread of existing wild type SARS-CoV-2.
Great, thank you. So I think the takeaway for our residents who are watching is keep up the masking and the distancing, all the stuff, the basics of 101 that we know works, and keep following those health guidelines. Thank you. Following on Mr. Snyder's questions about when we'll be able to get to the bigger population, I know while Fairfax is maintaining a separate system, is there any thought to actually either moving to the Virginia one or whether we'll keep it separate? And then the second half of that question is, if we are going to stay separate, to actually being able to allow people to do pre-registrations like the state one, so that we avoid kind of that massive flood of, I'm sure you're going to experience again once we get to 1C and phase 2 again, because I know that we had tech issues last time around. So 2-part question there.
Sure. So I'll answer the first part is, are we considering moving to the state system? We are in near daily discussion with VDH and with the information technology office at the state level. Right now, we are receiving sample data from VDH and from the state that we are able to compare to the data that we have. We, at this point, are pretty confident that the data we have in our system that is managed by Fairfax County on behalf of the health district is cleaner and more usable and more accurate for us. Some of the data that came in from the state was missing demographic information or contact information, so it was very difficult to parse out who the person was or how we were supposed to get in touch with them. And so for the time being, we're pretty confident that the system that we have is able to deliver vaccine appointments faster than moving to another state system. The other piece of that, and the reason that we have up until this point not expanded all at once, is that when you expand all at once, you end up with, this is an unofficial term, but we are using it. We call them ghosts. So these are people who register as soon as they're eligible, but then seek vaccine through other channels. And so by the time it comes around for them to get vaccinated, they may have driven to another district, they may have driven to another state, they may have met eligibility criteria through work and got vaccinated through that occupational category. So they end up in the system, and they appear on the list of people for whom you need to allocate vaccine, but they actually don't need it. And there's no way to circle back and say, I actually don't need vaccine. So it makes allocation, and it makes offering appointments very difficult, because you often have to invite factors larger than the number of appointments that you actually have. And so for that reason, we're comfortable with where we are, which is making sure that we open up progressively. So we opened up to additional occupational groups earlier last week, and we anticipate being able to open up little by little to more groups in the coming weeks. And in doing so, we'll make sure that we're actually capturing people who want to be vaccinated on that day or at the time that they register. And we're hoping to get to a point where we'll be able to offer vaccine appointments within a week of when someone registers. And in doing so, we won't have as many ghosts in the system, and we won't have to send as many blank invitations out that may never go filled. So it helps us manage our vaccine inventory and our appointment scheduling.
Great. Thank you. So on that note, I did note that in the Fairfax Health District that we did expand to 3 other groups within 1B. What sort of communications are we doing directly with employers? Because I feel like that's a channel that we should use as well to make, because I know that we push out information through social media and emails, and that tries to get to the end vaccinatee, I guess. But I think employers have a big role in this too, especially when we talk about grocery store workers and whatnot.
Absolutely. So we actually have a group of staff members on our COVID response team who are what we call liaison officers. So there are 4 of them, and they cover different groups, but they work primarily only with agencies and organizations that either the health department needs assistance from, or we have information for. So we actually have a team that works with private sector. And so that's through the chambers of commerce. It's through working groups that have been established over the course of the pandemic. So the private sector liaisons are able to reach out to employers and notify them that we are ready for their group. And so they provide instructions about exactly how to register. In addition, we have a significant amount of email traffic and inbound questions from employers or representatives of employers who are asking about either on-site vaccination or how do I register my employees. And so we have a pretty robust set of instructions for them about here's exactly what you need to do. Our registration form just went bilingual, so we now have a Spanish version that people are able to register with. So we're trying to expand our reach and use the channels that we've developed over the course of the pandemic to talk about things like testing and reopening, and leverage those channels to talk about vaccination. And we know that it's going to take us a while to pick up everybody who works in a particular group. But hopefully by reaching out to the corporate level and the chambers of commerce, we'll be able to reach a large majority of eligible employees.
That's wonderful. And Colin, it should include the City of Falls Church as well, because we're part of the health district, or is it only the county?
No, we are the health district, or we are the health department for the entire health district. So our liaison group works with employers across the entire health district.
Wonderful. So my last questions are about equity. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because I've been spending some time looking over the demographics data, and I share your concerns about, in particular, our Latinx population. I think they make up about 10% of our city population as well as statewide, but I think looking at our vaccination rates, they're only about 6%. And so I would love to figure out how, you mentioned targeted clinics at certain areas, whether we have any targeted clinics in this Falls Church or Greater Falls Church area to make sure we reach that population. Do you know of any active underway, and how can we support you with that?
Sure. So there are efforts underway to leverage the federally qualified health centers that exist, as well as some of the safety net healthcare providers. And so we're working with them through fixed sites around the county, around the health district in order to vaccinate. We are also working with the city of Falls Church directly on particular locations that may be appropriate or suitable for targeted vaccination clinics that would be stood up on an interim basis. So we have a model in which we, similar to our community testing events, when we were in the community seeking to test people who lived in particular areas of higher percent positivity, we have a partnership with Safeway that allows us to vet locations, make sure they're operationally sound, and then once we make sure that location is a go, we use partners in the community, partner organizations, community organizations, to pre-register people who may not, as I mentioned, they may not have computers at home, they may not have access to internet, they may not have email, they may not even have the ability to receive text messages or inbound phone calls. And so working with groups that are on the ground in the community and know where the need is, we're able to enroll individuals in the equity vaccination clinics. And then those we kind of return 3 weeks later, basically, to provide follow-up doses. And so that partnership has allowed us to, we are actively in discussion with Falls Church now, and we've done these targeted clinics in other parts of the health district over the last 4 weeks or so.
Great. Thank you. That's it for now.
All right. Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions right now. We do have a busy agenda. Mr. Duncan has one. Go ahead, Phil.
Thank you. This is probably a small thing in the greater scheme, but I did want to ask based on my personal experience. So over the last 3 weeks, I've had occasion to be at George Mason for my first shot and at the Government Center for second, and my wife at the Government Center for her first. And just as an aside, I want to say, I was extremely impressed with how the process worked at both locations. Are slightly different, but it's an amazing number of people that you're sending through and spitting out in a really short period of time. So bravo for all that. But, we're given, the card that we were given when we get our first shot and then second shot seems very old school. It's like getting your paper Social Security card. Is there a need to retain that card for purposes of future something? I guess we hope that by the 1st of July, like in Falls Church, everybody would be vaccinated. But between now and then, are you going to be asked to show this card somewhere, or is there any future utility to that piece of paper? Do we need to keep hold of it?
That's an excellent question, and it allows me to provide a little PSA. So that card is actually the official, it's the CDC designated official vaccine record. So that card is used nationally. It's the same template used in all 50 states. And so our recommendation, public health recommendation, is to save it, number one, and also take a picture of both sides so that you have an electronic copy of it if you need it. At the current time, there's no travel certificate or official proof of vaccination other than that card. Everyone who receives vaccine in each state is entered into that state's immunization registry. And so there is an electronic record that you received vaccination of a particular lot number at a particular site on a particular day. But those records are typically transmitted to electronic medical records so that your doctors are able to see, for example, you received the flu shot last year, but you didn't get it this year, so you're due for it. Most people don't typically receive copies of their immunization record unless there's a reason for it. So we are recommending that everyone save your card, save the original, take a picture of both sides, so that if there is a time, perhaps when you go to travel or you may seek to, most of it is travel related, visit another country, you have a way of showing, yes, I was vaccinated on this day and this day, and that completes the series. So we're telling everyone to hold on to them.
Okay, great. Thanks. That's helpful.
All right. Any last questions for Mr. Brody? Mr. Brody, thank you for joining us today. Keep up the good work, and we look forward to further updates.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. So let's move on to business on the agenda. Madam Clerk, will you call the first item?
Yes, we have a public hearing on TR 21-04, resolution consenting to and designating 3 new Falls Church specimen trees.
All right. Mr. Bradley, are you doing this?
I believe Mr. Prince is with us tonight.
All right.
So I'm gonna hand it off to him.
All right, Mr. Prince, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Tarter. Thank you, Council. Thank you, Zach. And thank you, Mr. Brody. I got my first shot today, so I'm pretty happy about that. So I'm requesting that the City Council designate 3 new specimen trees located on the Fellows property to include the one already designated. I believe these trees will provide a nice focal point for any future development for the property, whether it be very simple, informal trails or more involved use. I believe these trees will provide great focal points. So the 3 trees on the list, one southern magnolia. It's very large and healthy and growing near the Fellows court. It's a big, beautiful evergreen magnolia. A 28-inch sourwood. It's right adjacent to the magnolia. Also very, very pretty. It looks very small in this picture, but they don't grow very fast. And this is the largest one that I'm aware of in the city. And then our last one is a 49-inch tulip tree. While it's not nowhere near the largest tulip tree in the city, it is one of the biggest on the property. So our largest tulip tree that we have in the city is about 80 inches, and it's on the Falls Church property. So I'd like to see this tree get that big, but this tree has an incredible spread on it. So with that, I'd just like to request to add the 3 trees to the 47 existing trees to our specimen tree list. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments? Any public comment, Madam Clerk?
We received no public comment.
All right. Unless there's any comments or questions from council, is there motion?
I move to adopt TR 21-04.
All right, Mrs. Scott, do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
All right, Mr. Lichtenhouse on the second. Any final comment? All right, Madam Clerk.
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, Council.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Prince.
Thank
Let's
you.
move on to the next item. And let me ask before you read those different items, I want to ask the city attorney how these should be dealt with separately. Can we read them together? But what's your recommendations, Ms. McCross?
You can handle it either way, but it's fine to, if you want to discuss them all together, I suggest you have the clerk read each of the items, have the discussion, and then any motions should be adopted individually for the particular item.
Got it. All right, Madam Clerk, I think that's a great idea.
Okay, so I'll read all 4 through the stormwater utility. That's
yes.
Correct? Okay. We have TO 21-04, ordinance fixing and determining the budget of expenditures and revenues and appropriating funds for the fiscal year 2022, general fund, school operating fund, school community service fund, school food service fund, cable access fund, sewer fund, and stormwater fund. We also have TO 21-05, ordinance fixing and determining the FY 2022 FY 2027 capital improvements program budget and appropriating expenditure and revenue funds for the fiscal year 2022. We have TO 21-06, ordinance setting the rate of tax levy on real estate for tax year 2022 and on personal property, machinery and tools, and all other property segregated by law for local taxation in the city of Falls Church, Virginia for tax year 2021. And finally, TO 21-07, ordinance to set the stormwater utility billing unit rate in accordance with Chapter 42, Article 7 of the Code of the City of Falls Church, Virginia.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Shields, who's handling this from the city staff?
Well, thank you, Mayor Tarter. I will just make a couple of introductory comments, see if Ms. Bawa has anything to add, and then the majority of the time will simply be question and answer. So with these 4 items, I'll just speak to each of them in turn very briefly. First, with respect to the budget for FY22, the operating budget, we have been busy since it was presented to the City Council 2 weeks ago. Since that time, we've held a town hall meeting on Thursday, the week of presentation, and then we held a work session last week on the capital improvements program. For working through the budget, we have a work session tonight with the school board on the school board request. And on August 5th, August 12th, and August 19th, we'll focus on the general government operating budget. And the way
August, Mr. Shields.
I'm sorry, April 5th, April 12th, and April 19th. Thank you. And to help the council with that, we are preparing a series of short video clips that will feature our department directors, and they will give a briefing on their departmental budget. And so the city council can watch those outside of the meeting time, and then our meeting time together can be simply focused on strategic objectives and question and answer on those departmental budgets. Of course, those video clips will be available to the public as well, and hopefully they will be very informative. We're wrapping those up. We've done a good number of them today, but we'll be wrapping those up this week and posting those and sharing the link for those to the City Council, and then publicizing that for the public as well. So that's a new innovation on how we'll be communicating our operating budgets at the departmental budget level. With respect to the tax rate, that ordinance does have for first reading setting the rate at the current rate of $1.35.5 per $100 of assessed value. The budget, however, is built on a tax rate of $1.34.5. So we just want to note that. I'm sure there'll be some questions and discussion about that. I would also note that the round 1 question and answer document was emailed out to the City Council just prior to this meeting, and we'll be keeping track of any follow-up questions the City Council has so that we can respond in writing to those questions as well. The last thing I will note is for the stormwater fund, in the capital improvements program, we do have the major stormwater improvements that were recommended by the Stormwater Task Force. Those are going through final engineering right now, and the debt issuance and the expenditures for construction of those projects begins in FY22, and the plan of finance for that really kicks in next year in FY23, when we would need to raise rates significantly over a period of years to pay for all of those projects. For this year, we're asking for a 2% increase in the stormwater fee, which is to cover increase in basic operating costs to run the utility in light of the high number of smaller projects we've been implementing throughout the city to try to address nuisance flooding. And so that's a quick roundtable on the 4 items. Ms. Bawa, is there anything that you would like to add before we turn it over to Q&A? Let me add one thing before I turn it over to you. Ms. Mester has also made a video of her CIP presentation that she gave to the City Council last week. She did that without the benefit of being able to show the slides as she was making her presentation. So she's now done that by video. So that's available to the City Council and to the public as well. Ms. Bawa?
Good evening, Mayor and others, members. So in light of a heavy agenda, I'd like to cede my time to address council questions specific.
All right. Thank you very much. So before we get started, there's several items here. Several of us would like to make a statement, and I'm going to turn it over in just a moment to Vice Mayor Connolly to start if she'd like, and Mr. Snyder as well, and anyone else who has any statements to make. Secondly, I know some of our school board friends are on the call with us tonight, and I would just invite them if they have questions about the city budget they are welcome to ask and speak to it as well. So, but first I'm going to go ahead and maybe ask if Vice Mayor Connolly would like to start with a statement that she needs to make.
Sure. Thanks, Mayor Tarter. I make the following statement before City Council's discussion of TOs 21-04, 21-05, 21-06, and 21-07, adoption of the FY22 general fund and CIP budgets, and tax rates and stormwater fee rates. I am an employee of the Falls Church City School Board and therefore a member of a group of 3 or more persons who may be affected by these matters. I can participate in them fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
All right, thank you. Mr. Snyder, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Sure, Mr. Mayor. Although it is not required, I make the following statement before City Council's consideration of TOs 21-04, 21-05, 21-06, and 21-07, adoption of the FY 2022 general fund and CIP budgets, tax rates, and stormwater fee rates. My independent adult daughter is an employee of the Falls Church City School Board and therefore is a member of a group of 3 or more persons who may be affected by the city's budget. I can participate in this matter fairly, objectively, and in the public interest. Thank you.
All right, I have one as well I'd like to make. I make the following statement before City Council's consideration of TO 21-04, 21-05, 21-06, and 21-07, adoption of the FY 2022 general fund and CIP budgets, and tax rates and stormwater fees. My wife is an employee of the Falls Church City School Board, and therefore I'm a member of a group of 3 or more persons who may be affected by this matter. I can participate in this matter fairly, objectively, and in the public interest. Does anyone else have any statements they'd like to read? All right, well then let's go ahead and get on with the questions and answers and requests and the like. So given we've heard from staff, let's move on to comments or questions from council and the school board for that matter. Anyone have any questions, comments? All right, Mr. Snyder.
Sure, thank you very much. We're aware of the federal activity with regard to additional funds that may be available, and it's not entirely clear to me what the categories of funding are. We obviously want to be in full compliance with any guidelines and requirements, but it does appear that at least stormwater may be one of those that would be an acceptable expenditure of whatever funds we have. However, I've seen a projection of everything from 3 million to 16 million. So clearly there are a lot of questions. My question goes to the city manager and our chief financial officer. When will we have more certainty about what are appropriate eligible expenditures so that under this, so that we can take a look at where that money is best used in compliance with the guidelines that are established for it, and any potential impact, favorable impact that might be legitimate and appropriate on lowering the tax rate. My first question is when and how will we know about that? So that's the first question. And Mr. Mayor, I'll have several others.
Mr. Shields, do you happen to know the answer?
So we're pressing hard to get that information. And what I would ask for is if we could have a detailed discussion of that on August 5th. What I'm worried about is we have incomplete information as of tonight from our federal partners. And anything we say tonight is speculative, and we might have to sort of rehash it again when we get together at work sessions. So that would be my recommendation, to give us just a little bit more time to really understand that, and then we can give a very detailed briefing, because these are really important questions that you've asked, and I think we can better go do it with once we have all the information.
Right, and that's April 5th, not August 5th, right?
Yes, I have a mental problem with April and August, and so I apologize. Anytime I say August 5th, I'm trying to say April 5th. I apologize.
Okay, thank you.
Mental problem. Okay, noted.
Thank you for that. And I understand that some of it may be capital, so this relates potentially to the pay-as-you-go projects, about $400,000 worth in our operating budget. It may affect the CIP, and the potential impact on the tax rate remains to be seen. So those are all questions I'm sure that people are asking. The second question that I have goes to the school administration. We had a citizen during our public comment today outline 3 items: safe reopening for every child every day, a clear path for summer learning, and then a continued degree of support for students who may have been disadvantaged one way or another as a result of the pandemic. So do you have any comments about that? And are these items adequately funded in the school's request to the city council? So someone from the schools could answer that. And you may disagree, and please let me know, please let us know. But if these are all relevant, then are they included to the extent that you deem appropriate in the school's budget request?
I would just
thank you.
note,
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I would note that it may not be that all the school folks have joined yet, because the work session in which they're joining us is at the end of the agenda. So I see that Dr. Noonan is on the call with us. You're welcome to join us now. If it turns out that some of your school board members haven't joined yet, you'd like to defer, you're welcome to do so as well.
Sure, I'm happy to actually respond now, because I'm not sure that that's necessarily going to be part of the overall conversation with respect to the budget. But I will answer, Mr. Snyder. Thank you for the question. We are fully prepared to reopen, as we've said we were going to after spring break. We'll be opening 5 days a week for our elementary students, 4 days a week with an asynchronous day on Wednesday for our secondary students. So our students will be in 5 days a week at the elementary school, and in school 5 days a week at the secondary. Just one of those days will be in the asynchronous model. With respect to summer learning, we have shared a lot of information with the community already about what the swath of our summer programs are going to be. We are continuing to finalize all of the details around that. Unfortunately, what we're learning is that it's going to be a challenge for us to staff the summer positions, because our teachers, quite frankly, are just burned out after a very, very complicated and difficult year. So when we did our survey of those interested in teaching in the summer program, we did not get a huge response of folks saying that they were interested. However, we are going to and have already begun to make inroads with our colleagues around the region, as well as with colleges and universities, to see if they have some recent graduates or students that are studying to be teachers that could come in and support us in our summer programming. And then the last piece with respect to supporting students that struggled through the pandemic, we have continued through the pandemic to maintain bands of students that we have been able to target and support with extra time and support in the schools, and also with their teachers throughout the pandemic. And those students that need extra time and support for learning will certainly be first on the list to come in during the summer, as well as students that have gaps in their learning. So, and then with respect to your question specific to budget, all of those are in the budget and are accounted for. And that actually is going to be how a lot of our CARES Act or our Recovery Act money will be used going forward.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, we all want the tax rate as low as we can responsibly set it. One of the questions that I have is, and I guess the federal funding may or may not play a role in this, but I know one area of concern for me is I want to make sure we're continuing to maintain all the public safety functions of the city at the very highest level. So I asked the city manager, tell us a little bit more about the funding that's in the budget for public safety, the initiatives. I know the body-worn cameras is one of those, and yet I think the number in there is a preliminary number. Tell me a little bit more about public safety and what the needs are that are not, and I don't mean wants, I mean absolutely things that we have to do to maintain the public safety that are not in this budget. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And we will have a detailed discussion on the public safety budget when we get into our work sessions. But let me just provide an overview. The police department has significant unmet needs in this budget. They are asking for both additional civilians to support the smooth running of the department, as well as uniformed officers. And that's really driven by calls of service. Our police officers, many times we hear from the community, we would like to see officers on walking beats or on bicycle. We'd like to see them be more visible. We'd like to see them doing more traffic control. And our police officers are running from 911 call to 911 call. And so they don't have time for those activities that the community, I think, very much desires, and I think are also very helpful for public safety. It's sort of getting back to the roots of community-oriented policing. And that's a challenge when when your whole shift, you're running to, a car accident, to a break-in entry call, or this call or that call, which is generally nonstop for our shifts. So that's the big challenge that I think the department faces. One of the other things that we haven't discussed a lot with the City Council, and that is the exploration that is currently underway with Arlington County to move our emergency dispatch to the Arlington County Emergency Communications Center. We don't have a full picture of the fiscal impact of that. So we're working through those numbers so that the budget that's presented is essentially to carry the dispatch function that we have today into another year. But we do anticipate we might make a very substantial structural change to how we provide that service. If we do go to Arlington County, one of the things we lose with that is this kind of 24/7 presence, that we always have a dispatcher that is able to deal with anything at this building. And so that's something we're grappling with about how to meet that need, and that's not funded in the budget. And then one other feature of our 911 system is that a very high ratio of the calls actually are non-emergency. They're calls from citizens who have a basic question. It's like as if it's functioning as a 311 call center for over half of the calls that come in. And so we've been thinking about how we could provide kind of a switchboard, which sounds like kind of an old-fashioned idea, but to have it so if you call City Hall, you'll always have an operator who will pick up the phone if you have a question about building permits or about the treasurer's office, they can guide you where you need to be. I think that'd be a great service enhancement, but it all depends on how this conversation that is ongoing with Arlington County on dispatch goes. We hope to have more information on that in the coming weeks, and so Council will be more informed on those before you take action on April 26th. But it is an evolving situation right now. So that's a summary of some of the things we're working with in the public safety realm.
So let me just do one final follow-up question, Mr. Mayor, if I might. So I'm a little bit sort of confused by the answer here. The city manager has provided us a budget where the assumption is that all, especially the critical functions, would be adequately funded. What I'm hearing is that may not be the case with regard to police. So tell me, Mr. City Manager, what conclusion am I supposed to draw from this? Because there's a lot of talk about you propose a reduction of 1 cent in the tax rate, and there's discussion about more, but we all like that. I would certainly like that. But now I'm hearing that in the current budget, we're not adequately funding the police. So help me through this so that I can make the most rational vote possible.
So what we are funding in the budget is more civilian support for the police department and more of the public safety aids. And so the public safety aids give us a bit more flexibility on how we serve the public, at not the full cost of a uniformed officer. And so that's the strategy that we're taking, and that is a constrained strategy. I do think it's effective. I think it's been a well thought out strategy, but you know it doesn't meet all the needs.
Okay, I guess we'll return to that. Thank you. Those are the questions that I have for right now.
All right, Ms. Hardy.
I just had one to follow on while we were in public safety. So as part of the broader discussion on kind of police reform and hearing the recommendations from the Use of Force Committee, I think instead of, or in addition to kind of that civilian and aid function, we briefly talked about kind of adding mental health professionals. So having sat down with our police force, it sounds like the mental health calls just honestly take up a huge chunk of time that really prevents us from doing the other things that you've talked about, Mr. Shields, that we want to be able to get to, like more community policing. So is this budget an opportunity for us to actually fund that, whether we need to have it on staff or whether we contract it out with Fairfax County? Because that feels like that could be the game changer in how we actually do policing.
Yeah, so I think these are good conversations, really, I think probably to have with the chief, and I think we should do that in the work session setting, because I can speak to them, but she can obviously speak to them in far better base of knowledge than I can.
Thank you. That's it for now.
All right, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Thank you. So I was going through just recently here the Q&A, Kieran and Wyatt, that you guys provided from our last session. I just have some questions, and I know that there are some unanswered questions around this federal funding, but in terms of informing my own decision tonight on the tax rate, I just want to pick at a couple things here. So I'm looking at line 133, which are the kind of the four pillars or requirements for federal funding. And Cindy, I don't know if you have this available to put on the screen, and if you don't, I'm happy to read it out. Do you have that, Cindy?
I do. Just give me a moment.
Okay. And while you're pulling that up, there's some legalese speaking here, but basically it talks about supporting government services for revenue loss compared to a full fiscal year prior to the COVID emergency. So I'm just trying to work through kind of the calendar in my own head about what that would mean. And the way that I interpret that is if you've had a significant loss that affects government services due to COVID compared to revenue that was generated in the full fiscal year prior to the COVID emergency, that pandemic, the emergency, the national state of emergency here in Virginia was declared, I believe, in March of 2020. So does that mean that our comparison would be for full year 2019 compared to where we ended up with 2020? How would you all interpret that?
And Cindy, I think you'd probably be the best one to answer that question.
Sure. That's one of our challenges, and it's actually one of the specific questions we have into the administration, the U.S. Treasury. The initial understanding was that it was actuals for 2019 then compared to your COVID post budget, but we are still sorting out, is it actuals for 2019 and hopefully pre-COVID reduced local budgets, because as you all know, we had to reduce the budget because we have to have a balanced budget. So sorting out what the two benchmark points are so we know what the delta is in between is still one that we need clarification from the U.S. Treasury on. That then will help us to be able to know how much that dollar amount is
part that you are referring to at line 133 related to the reduction in revenue.
Okay. And Kieran, what was our total budget loss compared to original budget for last year due to COVID? Where we started and where we ended up. Can you remind me again?
Do you mean the 8-month outlook that we just did?
No, full fiscal year. So if we look at, because we're going into fiscal year 22, so what would, that would have been fiscal year 20. What was fiscal year 20 compared to fiscal year 19? Do you know?
Yeah, just give me 1 minute. I'll pull out the numbers.
Is the question though fiscal year 21 relative to fiscal year 20?
Well, we're in fiscal year 21, correct?
Yeah.
Yep. And so what I'm just trying to suss out here, and this is just based on some math that I've done, just trying to think as to how this would be interpreted, because if you use the term fiscal year as opposed to calendar year, that means something different for us than it does for other jurisdictions, just giving the timing of it. So I guess, Kieran, while you're looking at that, my point here is I'm looking at these line item requests, and my understanding from talking to folks that have been close to the drafting of this legislation is that there are far fewer strings attached to this money than we might have otherwise seen. And so if you look at the Q&A here that Cindy has in front of us, I mean, you look at line 125, talks about household assistance. That makes me think immediately of rent relief for seniors and others who receive tax abatement from us here in the city. And I know we've got a line item in the budget of an additional $42,000 for tax relief. We've got another $100,000 in the operating budget for affordable housing. We've also got some scholarships, which would fall into that category. And then I look at line 137 on the screen here. We're talking about necessary investments in water, sewer, broadband infrastructure. You know, we've got $275,000 listed in the operating budget for IT, which is related to infrastructure. The police have got another $145,000 for body-worn cameras. Whether that would fit into these categories, I don't know. And then we've got a number of other areas. So stormwater, I think, would fall into those categories. And so from my perspective, just trying to think ahead as to how this would be interpreted, I would expect for us to have a lot of latitude in how this money is used. And so, you know, my assertion in previous meetings has been I want to stretch further than the 1 cent that's being offered. Frankly, just going down, Kieran, to your response about my question of what it would take to eliminate the entire net increase in property taxes and actually leave homeowners' real estate tax bill flat, I believe is an additional 2.6 cents, if I'm not mistaken, which is just another $960,000 in the budget. And so just the things that I've listed in addition to that $200,000 COVID contingency, those things can be paid for with this federal money, and they will be paid for with this federal money. And so we have the ability to respect both the budgets that were brought in on guidance by the city as well as the schools, maintain those, supplant some of those things with federal funding, which will allow us to lower the property tax rate even further. If it takes us only another $960,000 in operating budget to offset that, we've got line items, the ones that I just mentioned, will get us there, and those can be replaced with federal funds. Moreover, looking at the responses here that you guys provided about the federal funding, it specifically says that we have 4 years to spend this money. 4 years to spend upwards of $15 million. And so with organic revenue growth, with the commercial investments that we've made, we've got the ability to dig a little bit deeper than just the 1 cent, the property tax rate decrease that's being offered. I, for one, would like us to see, I would like us to do the entire 3.6 to totally eliminate the increase in real estate tax rate, as well as hold off flat the stormwater increase. I think this is the year to do it. This is a huge gift to the city. And frankly, for all of us, if we can't find a way to cut the property tax rate more than the neighboring jurisdictions, which you guys have listed in here on page 7 at the top, well, we're considering a measly 1 cent when you've got Leesburg and Loudoun County cutting theirs 3 cents. And I guarantee you some of these others are going to come in stronger. This city of Alexandria is already at 2 cents, and they're not finished with budget deliberations yet. this is the year for us to do it. And I think it would just be shameful for us not to dig deeper to find a much more robust property tax cut for folks that deserve it. It does not require us to cut city services, does not require us to cut money from school budgets. And anything that we would be reducing, even if it is on the school side, would be immediately replaced with the federal funding money and then some. And again, I would remind everyone here that's listening, that's reading this, we have 4 years to spend this money. And so this is not a one-time thing where we're reducing the property tax rate at the risk of hurting ourselves next year. We've got plenty of time to spend this money. We're going to have plenty of latitude to do it. And I would urge all of us on council to respond to, the desires of the community and the folks that have written in and have spoken very strongly. Give folks relief beyond one penny. And then the last thing I'll say is I feel very, very strongly that we need to advertise a tax rate that is more than 1 cent. I think, frankly, I'd like for us to advertise the full 3.6 because I think that we can do it. I know others may feel differently, but this is the time for us to do it. We definitely need to cross that 1.3 threshold. One, because the money is there, and two, psychologically, I think it's important for us to do that because we have the ability to do it. So let's everybody dig a little bit deeper and figure out what our level of comfort is in reducing that tax rate, because this money is going to allow us to do it. And if we can't, I mean, honestly, I think most of us need to question our commitment to this budget process because the opportunity is absolutely there. And so that's my recommendation. And that's what I'd like to see come out of these deliberations is a deep, deep property tax cut.
All right. Thank you. Other comments?
Mayor, may I address a question from Councilmember Lichtenhouse on the revenues?
Yes.
Okay, so fiscal year 19 saw a growth of 6.3% over fiscal year 18. Fiscal year 20 was just, and these are just operating revenues, general fund. Fiscal year 20 was pretty much at the fiscal year 19 actual level. If we subtract out the federal funding that we utilized, CARES funding towards the last 4 months, we have a reduction of 0.5% in fiscal year 20 actual compared to 20 actuals compared to 19. The fiscal year 21 budget is about 2.1% below the fiscal year 20 actuals, and the fiscal year 22 proposed budget is about 2.1% over the fiscal year adopted 21 budget.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's good. I mean, in terms of qualifying for what we can use that money for, I mean, if we're down 2% over a prior year, you're effectively talking about a couple $1 million that just with that general assumption allows us to plug a lot of different budget gaps by removing things to allow us to take the property tax rate down. So I appreciate that, Kieran. Thanks for the quick math. But again, that supports my belief that we can do this. We absolutely can do this. And we need to do it now and not wait, because that latitude is definitely going to be there.
All right, thank you.
Just to recap quickly, the decline of 2% is also means we're not realizing any growth, like the year-over-year growth. So if you look at the net decrease, it's a much higher decrease. It's not just 2%.
Oh, sure. I mean, even if you'd have told me 1%, that would have been fine. So, but I understand what you're saying. It's significantly greater than that, but that's fine. Thank you, Kieran.
All right, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. So what I take away from what I just heard Mr. Lichtenhouse say is that we can meet all reasonable needs expressed in the proposed budget from the manager and the school board at a tax rate that is noticeably lower than the current. That's good news. I think we're going to end up in a really good place when we're all finished with this budget. It is going to be a hard journey just because of the situation with COVID and the uncertainty of when the money comes in from the feds and the state and how it may be used. But it's not that uncertain. I mean, I think it's becoming clear in other publications that I read that, the point of this federal exercise is to introduce money to state, particularly local governments, to help us make up for the punch in the nose that COVID gave the economy. And we will do that. We'll certainly do that. We can still do that and give our citizens some rate relief. So let me say something that is familiar to most of you, and then maybe close with something that is not as familiar. First, as I've said before, I live in a very typical house, $800,000 assessment. Assessment went up 5% over the past year. If we were to impose the tax rate that is being proposed, we vote on tonight at 135.5, I'd be paying more than $500 a year in additional taxes. You'd have to bring the tax rate down to 129 in order for the tax bill to be level. I don't think I'm going to be able to get a parade going for 129. Mr. Lickenhouse's suggested number is probably something along the order of 133 or so, and that's more realistic. I think that's where I'm going to end up supporting tonight. So there's that. Then the final point, so far in reading through the budget book, the most compelling sentence that I've seen is on page 15, where the manager's letter says economic development and private investment in the city remains critical to generating the revenue to reinvest in aging public infrastructure. As a minimal target, the city should seek at least $50 million per year in new construction value to buttress normal market appreciation and sustain city services and infrastructure without rate increases. Okay, so the target should be $50 million a year. I believe that the answer to the question, well, how do we do on that this year, is $72 million. $55 million in new construction, new commercial construction, mostly Founders Row, and then almost $18 million in single-family home new construction, increased in value. For my perspective, this is the year when, because of those numbers and performance, we need to declare a development dividend. Some would call it a disruption dividend, and I can appreciate that. We've put the folks in the citizens in the city through a good bit of change in the last 10 years, and there is certain disruption involved in new construction. And I feel like we've arrived at the point now where we should be able to turn back some of the benefits of the new construction that we've supported to the citizens in the form of a tax rate relief. And this seems like the perfect year to do it because of the city's ability to get through the COVID situation without, disastrous outcomes, and yet, be able to benefit from the state and federal monies that are going to come our way because we have, suffered some as a result of the COVID. So those are the points that I wanted to get across. Later on, when we're talking with the school board, I'd have a couple of more specific questions, but just generally speaking, that's what informs me. And finally, on the stormwater situation, I mean, everything that I read says that making necessary investments in water, sewer, infrastructure is going to be an allowed expense. And I think we need to get our projects shovel ready so that we are at the front of the line when the money comes out of the federal spigot. But I would not be able to support any increase in the stormwater fee this year or hopefully in any future year nearby until we, use all those federal dollars first to take care of our stormwater infrastructure backlog. Okay, thanks.
All right, other comments or questions? All right, let me ask a few then. So go ahead, Vice Mayor Connolly.
Oh, thanks, Mayor Charter. So I guess the question before us tonight is what rate are we going to set for these three ordinances or four ordinances? And I really appreciate Mr. Lickenhouse and Mr. Duncan's optimism on all this, and just the information we have gotten in the past week is great. Just to see how much information is coming out of the federal government and how we're going to be able to use that funding. So I think that is all really good. and I would advocate, if we're going to set the tax rate, to set it just 1 cent below, simply because we don't have any more details. But by the time we adopt the budget on August or April, see, Mr. Shields, it's April, not August. April, at the end of April, we'll know a lot more, because it seems like information is coming out quickly. And I would definitely support reducing the tax rate further, but I'd be worried to reduce it right now, given that we don't know all the information possible. But I do thank you for all of this information, and I think it's going to be really helpful going forward. And it's great to know that if we think about some of these things as infrastructure, we'll be able to do a lot of work, as long as they all qualify for those designations. Thanks.
All right. Other comments from council members? So let me ask it while we're waiting then for others to join in. Maybe someone has already. It looks like a hand may be up. Does anyone have any comments? I saw a hand briefly. Anyway, let me ask you, Mr. Shields, just sort of following up. So clearly this federal legislation is critical in our budget analysis, right? So what we can and can't do with it is going to inform the rest of our budget. And so we obviously, or at this moment, apparently do not have guidance, at least sufficient for your benefit or to your knowledge, that will allow us to sort of definitively know what we can and can't do. Nonetheless, are you putting together right now some ideas of what to use when on the chance or on the probability that we will in fact have the latitude we believe we have with these with this monies?
Yes, we are doing that right now. You know, we've known that this was coming for some time, so we've been thinking about it for a while. And obviously our pay-as-you-go and our CIP are things that we can greatly enhance and accelerate and fund in new ways, principally by avoiding debt. So we really look forward to that discussion. We do think, it's been a little difficult because we've had to just sort of deal with sort of our basic budget. And so we have not been able to really have a good, thorough process for thinking about these federal dollars. And obviously with the both the amount and the rules associated with them not being completely firmed up, it's made that planning a bit hamstrung. The only thing I would say is that this is first reading on the tax rate. I do feel confident that by April 26th, the council will have the information it needs to make a fully informed decision on the tax rate. And I don't think we're there right now. And so the ability to use these federal dollars to replace some of the dollars that we have right now in the budget is something that I would urge some caution on from the city council. It's, I understand the sentiments that were expressed, but at first reading, we do not have the information to confirm that idea. And so I would urge caution on that.
All right, we have some questions. Ms. Hardy, followed by Ms. Hiscott.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm having trouble with that hand raising thing, so I couldn't do it earlier, Mayor, when you called. So on that note, Mr. Shields, I think you mentioned that April 5th at our next discussion, you'll have more certainty around how much latitude we have. So let me make it more.
August 5th.
I certainly don't want to be talking about this come August 5th. April 5th. By then, can we have a more explicit, list of what items in the budget we think might qualify, whether that's future CIP, whether that's old debt, whether it's pay-go funding? But I think it would be helpful actually just to get down to brass tacks and look at a list of things, because I think we're all here kind of making guesses based on our read of the rules. And I think it'd be helpful for staff to kind of start us with a list of what we think would qualify. And I think on that note, I do think it's important for us to also just be aligned on principles of how we want to use the money. I think we're all going to be tempted and also be fielding requests left and right as we hear about kind of exactly how much we're going to get. And I want to make sure that this is an opportunity for us to really enact some transformational and long-lasting change. And we are very deliberate and strategic in how we go about that. So that's kind of my first comment and request is for the April 5th meeting, let's actually review a list. Second, I had a question about the COVID contingency fund. So the 200,000. Mr. Shields, Ms. Bawa, what specific items were we thinking? Is that kind of relief to our citizens? Is it rent relief, that sort of thing, or was it for offsetting kind of revenue losses potentially in the city?
I'll just say a couple of thoughts, and Ms. Bawa certainly can jump in. The federal bill had not been passed yet, so that's part of the reason it was put in there. So it was for exactly the reasons you listed. We do have a substantial amount of our community right now that is benefiting from emergency rent assistance and utility assistance. And we were a bit concerned about how we were going to transition those households if the money was not forthcoming. And then secondly, when we were watching the General Assembly, there were some of the actions by the General Assembly appeared to be very substantial unfunded mandates in terms of setting pay for different employees. And we were concerned at the time of budget development about how we were going to pay for that if those indeed were unfunded mandates. I think those issues have been clarified since budget presentation, and those state concerns. And a big one was on teacher pay. So Dr. Noonan can speak to how that's being handled. And then mandatory pay for constitutional officers. That was the other one that we were watching. So I think that probably on those things that were most immediately on our minds at the time that we set aside that contingency, I think we've gotten actually clarity and resolution on those. Ms. Bawa, anything to add on that?
No, I think you're good. Just as the city CFO, I would take this opportunity to just voice my 2 cents on the caution that we must take. A drop of 3.5 cents at this time may not be long-term sustainable for the city. A few things to note that in this budget, we do not have any growth in WMATA subsidy due to the federal assistance WMATA is getting. We have a few of the interjurisdictional contracts with Arlington that went down based on usage, and it could be COVID related. Staff is still looking into the invoices and the rationale behind it. So come fiscal year 23, there could be some bounce back into some of those increases. And I would rather urge sharing one-time federal assistance with the community, including businesses and whatever else, instead of lowering ongoing real estate tax rate by 3.5 cents. And even if we have to do that, I would caution for a phased approach. Do it across two or 3 years instead of doing it all at one go.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hiscott.
Sorry, I had the follow-up question. If we were to pull out that COVID contingency, Mr. Shields and Ms. Bawa, given that a lot of the things we were planning for as a contingency aren't really concerned, I'm not hearing serious heartburn over that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. The purpose of that 200,000 was to address any COVID-related expenditures, and as Mr. Shields said, it was prepared prior to any announcement on the federal funds. So,
got it. And so that gets us half a penny then, beyond kind of the manager's proposal of 1 penny. So down is certainly the direction that we'd go. I'm not sure how far down, especially at first reading, I'm willing to go given some of that uncertainty, but it feels like 1.5 pennies is reasonable at this point. Thank you.
Mr. Shields, could you respond as well? Do you concur with the contingency money?
On the general government side, I do not have any plans for the contingency funds for that 200,000.
And do you feel that the money, if needed, could come from this pot of federal money?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Ms. Hiscott.
Thank you. Most of what I was going to ask has already been asked, but I agree with Letty and am comfortable with the proposal of a reduction of 1.5 cents in the tax rate, the penny that we've already discussed and reviewed as of last week's presentation, and then in consideration of the $200,000 in the COVID contingency, which just leaves us a nominal amount to find. And then with more additional information that we find how we can use those funds, and if we can enumerate them in the way that Ross did, certainly there's absolutely more room for discussion there. But in terms of feeling comfortable for tonight, I would set it at 134 or 1.5 cents lower. I had a quick question that's a minor question, but we had a discussion at one point in time, I believe it was in the legislative committee, with regard to registrar being funded now at the state level. And I can't remember the details of that, but I think I still see that in our budget. And I'm wondering if that is, was that just a discussion at the state legislative level, or is that an expense that can also be put onto the state budget rather than our local budget?
Well, one initial response I would say is the governor's budget's not signed yet, and there's talk of amendments. So when preparing the budget, we didn't have preparing the local budget, we didn't have the state budget to confirm the registrar's piece. And so we can follow up, but part of it is also they have an unmet needs for additional staffing, and there's going to be changes to the election laws. Opening up for Sundays, for example, at the federal level. So we also need to work with the registrar to see what the cost impacts are of some of these other legislations. But there was proposed additional registrar funding in the state budget.
And Cindy, thank you for that clarification. What's the timing on that? And then how we would understand what impacts it would have or could have one way or the other on our budget?
The governor must submit amendments to bills and/or the budget by March 31st, 11:59 p.m. And then the General Assembly will have the opportunity to review and do veto session. And so in reality, it'll be end of April, early May for the state budget. We're anticipating it to be signed. So we might have some sense when you're nearing your April 29 second reading, but we may not actually have a signed budget yet.
Are there any other things in that budget that would also have a significant impact from the state level above and beyond what we've talked about? Are there other fluctuations like that?
It would depend on what the governor's amendments are. We survived some things around workers' comp that could have had a significant impact, but there are some retro COVID worker comp claims that could be paid. So it will be hard for me to answer till we start seeing amendments from the governor. He started sending back some bills amended this weekend. So I think we're going to start getting a read, but I don't have anything specific tonight.
Okay, we'll just combine that into all the other information that we have to wait for from the federal level that impacts our budget as well. Thank you.
All right. Let me ask the city clerk if there are any public comment on any of these matters.
There's no additional comment, no.
Okay. So we do have a work session still with the schools. I know Mr. Duncan has his hand up. I'll get to you just momentarily. But we do have also the this third of an acre as well to get to shortly, and then we're going to take a break. But anyway, let's go with Mr. Duncan.
So I was just going to try to get us to move to a vote. Somebody tell me, it seems like TO 2106 is what we're mostly talking about, the tax levy. Is that where I should begin my motioning?
Yeah, I would suggest so. Let me just look up the number here real quick. Maybe someone else knows it by the time I get to it.
TO 21-06.
Yeah.
I put it on the screen for you.
Ordinance setting the rate of the tax levy. So my motion, Mr. Mayor, would be to revise the language on line 64 of TO 21-06 to read $1.33. And with that change, move to grant first reading to TO 21-06, schedule public readings for April 12th and April 26th, schedule second reading and final consideration for April 26th, and advertise the same accordingly.
All right, so we have a motion for Mr. Duncan, which is reducing the tax rate by not the proposed 1 cent by the city manager, but 2.5 cents. Is that correct?
To $1.33.
Yes. Okay. So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second, Snyder.
Mr. Snyder on the second. So before we go to a vote, let's have some discussion. So what we just discussed a minute ago was an additional half-cent, bringing it down to 134. And so you're seeking an additional penny beyond the most recent discussion. Is that right, Mr. Shields?
Did you mean Mr. Me?
I'm sorry, Mr. Duncan. Yes,
Yeah,
Mr.
right.
Duncan.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. I won't give a long speech because I know we have other business. But I mean, to me, even if we did not have all the COVID money, which is, some of which is definitely going to come and help us out, this is the year to make the move to capture some of the dividend from our pretty aggressive development campaign. And 133 seems like a very responsible number based on the light items that just Mr. Littinghouse went through. I think we can definitely find $600,000-$700,000. Not necessarily even money that we would not spend, but we just won't spend it, on the first day of the new fiscal year. I mean, based on my experience of 9 budgets, what we're going to be looking at is a budget amendment in September or October, where we're going to have $1 million or more deal with to the good. And we would be able to put that money into some of the things that might not, they might be the first 4 out, to use the basketball term, in this year's budget that we would pass on April 26th, but we'd be able to put them right back in before, we'd be very far through the fall. Sorry, that's a little longer speech than I meant to give, but yes, the answer is $1.33.
All right, Mr. Lichtenhouse, then Mr. Snyder, and then Vice Mayor Connolly.
Yeah, I fully support that. It's not as much as I would like, but I think it's a good rate to advertise, and we can work from there. And if it's an additional $600,000, we can find that. We got it. That's not a problem. So I'll support that and hope that we can actually do more.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure. After listening to the discussion with the COVID contingency, which I think it's responsible to remove, I think there's also about $400,000 in pay-as-you-go capital. And I do think that the federal money, even at the low end, would be able to offset some of the debt and other medium to long-term aspects, as well as making up the costs. I wouldn't be comfortable going lower at this point. Maybe we can get there, and I hope that we could as we clarify things. But I'm willing to be a little bit more, what should I say, aggressive, considering the federal legislation and what we know about it so far than I was previous to that, but I would not be comfortable on first reading going any lower. So I think this is reasonable based upon all the evidence that we have so far. Thank you.
Sure. Vice Mayor Connolly?
That's a penny too low for me at this point in the process. I would love that it could get there or even lower, but I feel like for first reading with so much unknown information, it's much wiser to do 134, which is still lower than I thought it would go last week. So I don't know how to offer an amendment to that, or if we vote on Mr. Duncan's and see what happens, but I would suggest 134.
Ms. Hiscott?
Let me just make sure I understand this process correctly, because this is, I do not have the luxury of 7 budget votes previously. If we advertise at 134, there's absolutely no reason we couldn't go 133 or even much further based upon what we actually find out from. We should have more information, in other words, to have make a decision by the time we need to decide upon this, that we could go lower. And in which case, I'm trying to understand the benefit of going below what we already know tonight versus another night when we have more information and more data.
So we can't go higher than the rate we set tonight, but we can go lower.
Right. So if we don't have all the information, we don't know exactly about pay-as-you-go and that $400,000 yet, and we don't know exactly if we can use the funds for everything that Ross listed. I feel more comfortable with as the city manager and everybody's agreed that $200,000 is no longer necessary, which provides you another half cent. And then if it's another 1 or 2 or 2.5 cents below that, when we find out what the federal dollars really actually are, when they can be spent and how they can be spent, I mean, I'm all for all the reasons that were all articulated tonight to reduce the tax rate. But I'd be more comfortable for that when I see the legislation in more details. So I will not be supporting 133, but 134 with the idea of going further in April.
All right, thank you. Ms. Hardy, did you have anything you wanted to say?
I was going to echo that I think that we can set it responsibly tonight, 134, with specific direction to the city manager to responsibly find another 400,000 or more in time for second reading and adoption when we have more information.
So let me ask the city manager right now, as far as backing out pay-go, do you see an issue with that, Mr. City Manager, or what are your thoughts on what you've just heard?
I would say let's get all the information. In the briefings that we've had, the language of non-supplanting is language that we do hear in verbal briefings. I'd like to learn more about that. I think we all should learn more about that, exactly how that's going to be phrased by the Treasury in their instructions to local governments. And I would just remind the council that the process will be is that in order to receive these federal dollars, there's going to be a letter, and it's going to have a whole long list of bill of particulars on it, essentially a contract, and we're going to sign that letter, and it will lay out what all the rules are, and it will probably give the federal government the ability to go right into our bank account and pull that money out if we don't follow those rules. So I think it is worth making sure we understand those rules before we make assumptions on setting the tax rate. There is time between first reading and second reading to get that clarity.
All right. Well, I guess from my own perspective, it's my hope and my expectation that we'll get the tax rate below 134. But given what I've just heard, I do have hesitancy to restrict us and tie our hands to not be able to go there if, in fact, these restrictions are cumbersome or they're such that we can't use it for things we think today it's highly likely we will be able to use it for. But I would say that once we do get that guidance, and even if it's late in the game, it'll be my expectation that we will quickly put together a program to use them to our best advantage of our taxpayers so that we don't miss the opportunity because this guidance takes a week or two to get to us. And so I would ask that you be looking at that right now, Mr. Shields, and putting together options for us and what you think is the most likely ways that we can do this in a fiscally responsible manner that will utilize these rules and benefit our taxpayers. So I again would support 134, but at least at this time, not below it. We do have a motion and we have a second, and we can take that vote now and see where it takes us. Madam Clerk, do you want to go ahead and call that vote, or Mr. Duncan, do you want to make a second motion, or you just want to go ahead and hear this motion out?
Yeah, let's hear this out.
Okay, fair enough. All right, Vice Mayor or Ms. Heath.
Yes. Ms. Conley?
No.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
No.
Mr. Litkenhouse?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz-Hiscott?
No.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter?
No.
Motion fails 4-3. Thank you, Council.
Do we have an alternative motion?
Mayor, I'd like to move to grant first reading for TO 21-06 with a revised tax rate of $1.34 per $100 of assessed value.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
So who was on the second? Was it Ms. Hiscott?
Yes.
Okay.
And Snyder too.
All right, well, Celeste, how many seconds can you take?
Just one. I heard
right,
Mr. Snyder, but
Ms. Hiscott then.
Okay.
All right, you want to go ahead?
Okay. Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
No.
Ms. Hardy? Yes. Mr. Lichtenhouse?
No.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-2. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a motion regarding the other items? The motions? We got three
can start
other.
back at TO 21-04.
All right. Does anyone have a motion on that item?
Oh, yeah, we got it.
Mayor, I move to grant first reading for TO 21-04, schedule public hearings for April 12th and April 26th, and schedule second reading and final consideration for April 26th and advertise the same according to law.
All right. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. Any comment? Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan? Oh, Mr. Duncan?
Phil, you there?
I'm sorry. Did you not? Can I pass right now? I'm not quite sure. We're voting on 2104. Is that what we're doing?
That would be the budget. Yes.
Oh, sure. Yes.
All right.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yes. And Celeste, if you could change my vote on the last one to yes in support of the 134, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, let's finish this one.
Sure.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. I will note Mr. Lichtenhouse's request regarding the TO 21-06 tax rate.
Thank you.
All right. Someone want to give a motion on the next one?
And that would be TO 21-05. And that's
Move to grant first reading to TO 21-05 to schedule public hearing. Wait, is that the one we just read?
All right. Do we have a
April
second?
12th and April 26th.
Oh, gotcha. You're still going. Okay, keep going.
Schedule second reading and final consideration for April 26th and advertise the same according to law.
All right. Mr. Duncan, did you have a question? Do you want to make a second?
Just somebody else can second. Just a question after they do.
All right. So do we have a second for this item?
Snyder seconds.
All right. So Snyder on the second. Mr. Duncan, question?
I'm sorry. My hesitation and question revolves around the stormwater fee. Where does that live? I want not to approve a higher stormwater fee.
That's 2107.
Okay.
Next one.
All right.
That's the, I'm sorry, wait, that's the next one?
After this one, I believe. So the one we've got before us is not that one.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, it's difficult to keep track of all this. Thank you.
I hear you. All right. So we've got a motion and a second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, Council. And we are on to TO 21-07.
All right. So, Mr. Duncan, did you have a question before we get to a motion? Or just a statement?
I'm trying to look at that now and see where the wording is that I want to change. If somebody can do it faster than me, please.
Yeah,
let me ask the city manager something while you guys are looking for the language. So I think the motion is going to be to keep the rate flat, to have no increase. Mr. Shields, as relates to that, are you confident this money, this federal money, can be used to take account for that proposed increase?
Well, I will say that this seems like a very good use of these dollars, of the federal dollars. we are given a little bit of a pause that there are certain infrastructure that is listed and stormwater isn't. I think we're going to get that clarified shortly, because it should be, no question about it. And but I would just note that this is really basically reflecting our current spending in the stormwater fund, and so that's what it's intended to cover. It isn't a huge amount of money. I think this fee increase would generate 40,000. I'm sorry,
Mr. Sheets, 45,000.
$45,000 of additional funds for the stormwater fund.
Okay.
So, Mr. Mayor, may I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so what's the pleasure of the group? I mean, I've been the skunk at the picnic here. I don't want to continue that if everybody just wants to go ahead and pass this through.
No, Phil, I'll be a skunk too. I want to amend it, keep it flat. You can do it, and I'll second it, and we can skunk it up together.
Okay, well, I'm reading, I'm not sure. It appears that the rate increase is embedded in the language that I'm not sure what it is that I'm wanting to move, but I basically want the rate increase to be 0.
So before we get on to a motion, let's let Ms. Hiscott ask her question, or if she can.
I just want to make a statement that I feel the same way. I want to be reducing our taxes and reducing our stormwater fees with the federal funds, but I'd like a little bit more information. I'd like to see them. I'd like to confirm that. And since we have the opportunity to do so, I'd like to wait until we have that information with the intention and the assumption that the city manager just shared that we can use this money for stormwater. But I don't want to make that decision prematurely and find out that those federal dollars can't fund this. So my goal is to, like we were talking about with the tax rate, with the stormwater, also decrease it just with more information. And I think we can do that in April without making that decision tonight, based upon my understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hardy?
So that's actually my question is, unlike the rest of the ARP bill, I think stormwater is spelled out pretty explicitly. Is that something that we can have confirmed, Wyatt?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, it's called out water, sewer, broadband, right? So
it is.
So I totally agree with the sentiment that we want more information.
I don't understand.
Mayor, if I could clarify, when it says water and sewer, that is not stormwater, and so we formally asked for a definition because they haven't defined water, but usually water and sewer. Water is potable water and not stormwater. I do agree it should be included, and we've asked for that formal determination from the U.S. Treasury, but they specifically use the words water, sewer, and broadband, and before this legislation was adopted, we formally asked for stormwater to be included, and it was not.
All right, any other comments?
Yeah, Phil, I support it. Phil makes a motion, I'll second it. I feel very confident that it will be allowed to be used for stormwater. So I think we need to go ahead and draw a line here and let taxpayers know that we're moving in the right direction.
Vice Mayor Connolly?
Since no one's actually made a motion yet, I'm going to move to refer 21-07 as is. I don't want to jump the gun on Mr. Duncan, but I haven't heard anyone make a motion. And I would agree with Ms. Hiscott that it's just premature to make any changes till we know more information.
All right, Mr. Duncan, I don't know what you have to say. It looks like, in part, at least, your thunder may have been stolen. That's probably my fault. So
what I have to say is, it's incredible how difficult it is to even just give the taxpayer $5 back. You know, I mean, I appreciate Metro Lake and on this, but I'm not going to propose any change beyond what the vice mayor suggested.
Right,
I hope that we are able to do, what it is that we are promising to do tonight. Experience has taught me that it is just really difficult to claw back money once first reading is given. And I believe and trust and hope that this time there'll be an exception. Even without the COVID money, we should be able to have done the other one and this. Anyway, that's all I got to say.
All right, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'm sorry, I missed the motion.
Vice Mayor Connolly?
Oh, so my motion was to grant first reading to TO 21-07, schedule public hearings for April 12th and 26th, schedule second reading and final consideration for April 26th, and advertise the same according to law.
Thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Snyder seconds. And let me explain why. We have a stormwater issue here that's very deep and very wide. And I don't want to signal that we're going to delay in any way. And I'm not saying those who would vote for no stormwater increase are saying that, but I'm really concerned about misinterpretation of that. And for that reason, I'm going to vote to stay the course, make the expenditures. My hope is that this will be offset by the federal monies, more than offset, so that we can have a more aggressive approach to stormwater. But I don't want anything misconstrued that I'm backing off dealing with the stormwater issues that have affected our community. So for that reason, I'll vote to maintain this current number for tonight, but with a clear indication that we're going to be able to the hope that we'll be able to bring that number down and to be more aggressive in dealing with this issue. Thanks.
All right, any other comments? That would be my hope as well. This federal money gives us great opportunity. I think, unfortunately, we're just not at the doorstep, or we're not yet have the kind of certainty that I think is prudent to make decisions that, unfortunately, we can't unwind in some ways. In other words, advertising at too low a rate if the money doesn't come through. So my hope and expectation is in the very near future, we will, in fact, be able to offer broader relief than we're proposing tonight on the general tax rate, and also as relates to the stormwater fee. But for my purposes, or in my opinion, tonight we're just a touch too early. So I will support this as well. Mr. Lichtenhouse, did you have a
Yeah, I did. So I understand folks' reservation about wanting to have perfect answers, but I don't want perfect to be the enemy of good. I personally feel like we have enough information, and just based on other discussions that I've had, and I think some others have had, I feel that there's going to be more broad application. So I would just ask. So I'm not going to support it, and it's not that I don't support fixing stormwater, but I feel very comfortable and confident that this money will come through. We'll be able to use it the way that we want to. So I'm not going to support it, but I would ask for the city manager, assistant city manager's commitment to make sure that we have the answers that we need before second reading. Because one of the things that always concerns me about this is that we say we need more data, we need more answers, we need more information, and then 11th hour we don't have it, and we're forced to vote in the context of a very different feeling than most of us are displaying right now, which is willingness to cut deeper, but we don't have the information. So my question, Wyatt and Cindy, is can you guys commit to giving us the information that we need to be able to make that decision when it comes to second reading?
The federal government needs to give us the information. They haven't done so yet. So what I can definitely commit to is that as soon as we have it, we're going to analyze it immediately, and we're going to share it with the council immediately.
Okay. Is there a specific date when we're expecting to hear back?
Cindy, has a date been used?
They have not specified a date. They are supposed to distribute the money within 60 days of the bill being signed and the certification. So we are expecting, and we do have the sense of this administration, to move as quickly as possible. I will have another statewide meeting April 1st, which will be for your next work session, and we're working this issue daily. But U.S. Treasury and the administration have not stated a date where they will distribute the guidance.
Okay, so we can't make a guarantee. So my request, my ask would be for all of us here on council to do some of our own homework as well, so we're comfortable in making a an informed decision, because it doesn't sound like we're 100% confident that we're going to have the data that everybody needs to make a perfect decision. So I, for one, feel confident at this point. So I won't be supporting it, but I sure as heck hope that everybody feels comfortable enough to make a decision based on the information at hand, whether it's perfect or not, come second reading. So that's all I have.
All right, thank you. Ms. Heath, will you go ahead and let's get on with the vote?
Okay. Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
No.
Ms. Hardy?
No.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
No.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 4-3. Thank you, Council.
All right, I think that does it for our budget package. So I do want to take a break, but if we can get through this next item quickly regarding the subdivision of land, which I don't think should take a whole lot of time, then we can wait till after that is over. Mr. Shields, how long do you think this item will take?
Ms. Aubrey will give us a very nice staff report. It was discussed at work session last week, so we'll just do a quick summary for the public. And I would just remind the council that this is simply a referral out, and what the request would be is that to start the process with a final decision on this, which would be scheduled at the same night as SESP, which is currently scheduled for May 24th. Ms. Aubrey.
And before we get started, I would note that our friends from the school board are with us tonight, and they're certainly welcome to comment on this matter or ask questions and participate any way they deem fit. So, Ms. Aubrey?
This item is TR 21-07, resolution approving the acquisition of approximately 0.33 acres of land from the Falls Church City School Board to the City of Falls Church, being a portion of Real Property Code number 51-221-008, located at 7124 Leesburg Pike, and authorizing the city manager to accept a deed of conveyance and execute the deed of re-subdivision and such other documents as may be necessary to complete the transaction.
All right, Ms. Aubrey.
All right. Thank you, City Council, Mr. Shields. The request is for the city to acquire approximately 1/3 of an acre of land from the school board to accommodate proposed changes in the site layout design of the West Falls Economic Development Project, specifically for the Phase 2 office building. And this is shown in attachment 3 of the staff report. Since the additional land requested involves the transfer of land between the school board and general government, it is being processed as a land purchase, and there is also a related lot line adjustment application currently under review. The staff report includes the roles and authorization of City Council and Planning Commission in the purchasing or selling of land, as provided for in the City Charter and the Code of Virginia. The staff report also includes the history and background of the subject site, including the 2019 land acquisition and conveyances between the city and the school board that were in support of the new high school site plan and the economic development project. The existing city and school board parcels total approximately 34.65 acres and is currently developed with the new high school, Mary Ellen Henderson Middle School, and the existing George Mason High School, which is set to be demolished. And this land became part of the city through the 2013 boundary adjustment agreement with Fairfax County. Up to 30% or approximately 10.38 acres of this land can be used for any lawful purpose per the boundary adjustment agreement. And the additional 1/3 acre for the West Falls Economic Development parcel would result in a new parcel total acreage of approximately 9.78 acres or 28%. So staff recommends that council refer TR 21-07 to the Planning Commission and School Board, and work sessions and hearings with these groups are set to happen in March and April, and a final public hearing with council is anticipated for May 24th. And with that, I can take any questions. And I would also mention that Evan Goldman and Robin Betterall with
Falls Church Gateway Partners are also on the call.
All right, so before we get to questions, I'm just going to ask if any folks from the school board or school administration have either any questions or comments or any thoughts they'd like to share before we get started with council questions and the like. Do any of you all have any questions or comments? All right, looks like maybe some, yes, Ms. Litton, Chair Litton.
Thank you, Mayor Tarter. So just so I'm just understanding process, I know we've looked at this once as a school board, I think this fall, but you guys will refer it to us, and I believe we'll need to pass, approve a motion, and then it needs to come back to you by your May meeting. Is that correct? Is that your understanding of process?
That's my general understanding, but I'm going to have the city manager confirm. Mr. Shields?
Ms. Aubrey, have you, could you respond to that just in terms of the specifics of the chair's process description?
Yes, the last time that this project and this process was before the school board was to discuss the special exception entitlement amendment and the special exception site plan for phase 1 of the development, which that's all basically the land use entitlement planning processes. So as part of that, though, they were showing that they needed this extra land. And so this is the formal process that makes that happen. So, but we are kind of, all of this is kind of tracking together, which is anticipated to come to final action in late May.
But just to get to the question, in terms of additional action from the school board, do you know what that action is and when?
So there will need to be similar to what was done in 2019, the school board would need to take action on I believe, resolution to convey that 1/3 acre to the city. And so that would need to happen either before, I believe last time it happened like the night after the city took action on everything on our end. So, but yeah, so either like right before or right after the land use entitlements and the city takes action on this item.
Great, thanks.
May I ask a process question as well? This is Peter Noonan. Does it make sense since the school board is being asked to convey the land to the city council, would it make more sense for the school board to take action prior to the city council taking action? It seems like since the school board is actually delivering the land to you, it would make sense maybe for them to go first.
That sounds about right to me as well.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if you need some more time, I don't think anyone wants to put you on the spot, Miss Aubrey. Maybe that's something we can consider, or you can consider in connection with the city attorney and the school's attorney, and just confirm that and maybe send an email around to folks.
Yes.
Does that work for you, Dr. Noonan?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Tarter.
All right. So let's go to other questions and comments again from school board members, school administration, and city council members as well. Are there any questions or comments? And while we're waiting for those, I'm going to ask the clerk, is there any public comment as to this matter?
No, there is not.
All right, well, then the matter is closed to the public. Are there any questions from anyone before we move to a motion? Any additional comments? All right, let's go ahead and take a motion or entertain a motion. Does anyone have a motion they'd like to make?
Mayor Tarter, I'll move to refer TR 21-07 to the School Board and Planning Commission for review and recommendation to the City Council with consideration of a possible change to the schedule based upon when the school board's able to vote on it.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Ms. Hiscott on the second. Any further comment? All right, Madam Clerk.
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Mayor Tarter.
Yes. And before we take a brief recess, we do have one consent, or we have some consent agenda items. Can we bang those out and then take ourselves a short recess? Anyone have a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
All right. Do we have a second? Ms. Hiscott on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Connolly,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yeah. Yes.
Ms. Hardy,
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse,
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
and Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
All right. So unless there's any objection, I would suggest we take a brief recess, let's say, and reconvene at 10:02 in work session format with the school board. So again, if there's no objection, let's go ahead and adjourn a recess until 10:02. All right, it is 10:02. I hope everyone's ready to reconvene and get into the work session portion of our agenda. Madam
Mayor,
Clerk, and
Mayor, I'd like to confirm FCCTV is back on.
I'm sorry, you did confirm that, or you're going to?
Yes, confirmed.
All right. So unless there's any objection, let's go ahead and get back into our meeting, particularly the work session with the school board. So again, welcome to our school board colleagues. We appreciate you sticking around. I know some of this meeting might have taken longer than you might have anticipated at first blush, but we thank you for sticking with us. Mr. Shields, is there anything you want to say before we get started on the school board portion of the agenda?
Sure. I'll just say a few brief things by way of introduction. And one, I just would, from my perspective, I feel like we are in an era where there's been really remarkable collaboration between the schools and general government on so many important issues. And budgeting is certainly one of those. Whether the work that we do together on the budget committee, where the city council and school board members and staff work together in those budget committee meetings, just to work through issues, share information, and certainly Dr. Noonan and Kristen Michael and Michelle Kopic, that whole team worked so closely with our finance team and with myself, and that is just deeply appreciated. And I think it's allowed a lot of very positive things to happen. So I just wanted to note that to start with. In recent years also, when we've done this annual budget meeting between the city council and the school board, I think the last 2 years, maybe before COVID, we did it as part of a dinner. And I was just talking about that with the vice mayor, Mary Beth Connolly, before this meeting, and lamenting the fact that in this virtual context, we haven't really been able to break bread together, which we've done, I think, as part of this budget review session together in recent years. But nonetheless, we are here together, and this is the opportunity, I think, just for the city council to ask questions about the school budget, and for the school budget to provide information that would be useful to the city council. So that's the intent of tonight. And I will now turn it over to, it looks like Vice Mayor Mary Beth Connolly has her hand up, and she might want to add a few comments as well before we get started.
All right, sure. And I would just add to what you just said that I think this has been really an incredibly productive era in school board and city cooperation. And I think the proof of that is this incredible new high school that's just recently been completed, but so many more things, I think, over these past few years have been so remarkable and productive in our relationship. So, but I do want to go ahead and give the vice mayor, who's also chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, an opportunity. If she'd like to say anything at this point, you certainly are welcome to. Vice Mayor Connolly?
Thanks, Mayor Tarter. And I would like to echo what Mr. Shields and Mayor Tarter both said about welcoming the school board to this meeting, and being sad that we couldn't have dinner ahead of time. and also being sad that it's after 10 o'clock at night. So I'm going to talk really fast so we can get through this quickly. In my time as the chair of budget and finance, which has been like almost 6 years now, maybe even 7 years, one of the things that has happened in recent years, in the last 3 years in particular, is that we have worked so closely together on budget guidance and budgeting that for the last 3 years, the school board has come in at the budget guidance that the city council has requested. And that is unprecedented, as far as I know, in the city of Falls Church. So a lot of times in the past, when we would have a meeting during the city council's budget cycle, it would be to really ask questions and see if the school board would be able to reduce their request at all. But we don't have that situation this year because the school board has worked so hard with school staff and with community input to come up with a budget that meets the school's needs and meets budget guidance. So for that, I applaud you and thank you, and say that we really appreciate that working with you. And part of that has come out of the work of the Budget and Finance Committee and our framework for a revenue sharing agreement. And part of it is just because we have great collaborative working conditions together. So I thank you for all of that. Several years ago when we had a joint meeting, and I think there's some new people on here that may not remember this, but I had a great graphic and my image of a zipper. And we were talking about the school project and how each little piece of the school project has to fall together like the teeth of a zipper coming together so that in the end we would have our school and we would have our economic development. And at the time that that came to be, we were pretty far away from getting to that. So our zipper is zipping, and there have been a few hitches along the way, but cooperation and collaboration is really important. So again, thank you all for being here tonight. And I know there's some questions, and I'm really looking forward to going forward arm in arm and continuing to zipper up our zipper. And as you heard in our last chunk of discussion, we have a lot of anticipation for what's going to happen with federal monies coming into the city. And I'm confident that between all of the school board, city council, and all of our staff, we will be able to work together to come up with some plans for things that really benefit all of the city. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. So with that, I'll turn it over to either Chair Litton or Dr. Noonan, whoever would like to speak. If you have any remarks, you might want to go. Looks like Chair Litton. So Shannon.
Thank you, Mayor Tarter. I just want to echo, I guess, what everybody has said and say thank you on behalf of the school board for an opportunity to meet together. I think it's always helpful when we're actually together and trying to work on these things as one body. So thanks so much for that. As you know, I was here, Dr. Noonan and I were here 2 weeks ago to present more of the details. But we're happy to be here tonight to answer questions. And I do just want to say I was encouraged by tonight's conversation. It sounds like there may be a way for the city council to meet some of their goals while also being able to honor the 2.5% budget guidance that you guys sent us back in December. So I really appreciated that conversation, and I hope we're able to keep that on track throughout the process. So thank you.
All right. Do you all, it sounds like you don't have a presentation and any additional materials, which is absolutely fine. So if it's okay, I guess I'll open it up to council questions and comments and see if there are any for you and for Dr. Noonan and the other members of the board. So Peter, do you have something you wanted to say, Dr. Noonan?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Tarter. I did, and I don't know if I can put my hand down. I'll try. There we go. Nope, still didn't do it. There we go.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, I see on the screen that there is an answer that we sent over to Ms. Bawa that came from the City Council, and hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at that. There was one bit of information that I thought would be useful to the council tonight that I would share, simply because there has been some, the numbers of the Relief Act have been sort of tossed around, and I just want to make sure that you all know sort of what the full scope of the funds that we've gotten and where they've come from at the school level have been. So let me just say that we initially got some money from the original CARES Act in ESSR or ESSER funds in the amount of about $37,000, about $37,500. And that was the first amount that we got way back early on in the process. Unfortunately, because of the way that the funding was allocated from the federal government, we were not the recipients of a large amount. In fact, the City of Falls Church got the least amount of any funding from any school division in Virginia. So the amount of money that we got was very small in that first batch. But the second batch, which came, was from the second CARES Act. And you might recall from the second CARES Act, the funding was slightly different. So we got $453,000 in the second CARES Act. And with those dollars, we did a lot to support our capital facility upgrades, to improve our air filtration, looking at facility cleaning and sanitation, personal protective equipment, PPE, staffing for teachers for distance learning. And then we spent a lot of money on infrastructure in the schools to support our distance learning. And the way that we were able to support the remainder of the budget items that we had relative to the CARES funding was through the generosity of the City Council. And I did want to make sure that you all are reminded and remind the community that you all allocated us $322,000 out of City CARES Act funds. So I know that there was a number being tossed around that we had received $1 million. I guess I just wanted to make sure that I was clear that the amount that the schools got from the CARES Act from the city was $322,000. So the combination of all of those funds we used on a variety of different things and have at this point been largely expended, fully expended. In the next CARES Act, we are still a little bit unsure, much like your recent conversation this evening, of what the money amounts are going to be. But early indications look like we're going to receive about $330,000 in this most recent Relief Act. That $330,000, just to give you a sense of how some of that can be used, we know right off the bat 20% of it has to be reserved for addressing any learning loss that would happen and provide equitable services to our low-income students and residing eligible attendance areas. So that would peel off $60,000 of that $330,000 that we're anticipating that we're going to get. And then the remainder of that, and this goes to the question that was raised during public comment this evening, is intended to be used for our summer programming this year. So we do have that money coming in, but I wanted to make sure that the council knew that the money we had received has all been expended, building out infrastructure, working on PPE, working with our staff, and then the additional funding that we're looking at on the school side of $330,000 is going to be used for intervention and our summer programs. So that was the one piece of information that I thought was important to share with the council, just to make sure you knew kind of what the universe was of the funding that we were expecting in the next round of relief, but also just to clarify the amount that we've received to date from the council is from the CARES Act funding was $330,000 roughly.
All right, thank you very much. So let's go ahead and open it up to questions. Does anyone on council have questions for any of our school colleagues? Mr. Snyder?
Sure, thanks. So my main budget-related questions were asked and answered earlier this evening, so thank you for those responses. I always want to try to listen to every voice in the community and make sure people know that they're being heard and that their issues are not being, avoided. And so thanks for the detailed response, and we'll continue to work together to try to address the issues that we know the pandemic has visited upon us. Question really to the schools. Do you see any things that would undermine the quality of education that we've been able to offer? Once we get through the pandemic, are we maintaining the quality that attracts people to our community at this budget level, and it's kind of a generic question looking out a little bit on the horizon, because my fear is if we lose the value proposition, then we start to see a real division in the community. So any comments about that? Particularly, we're a larger school system than we were, a couple decades ago, but we seem to be maintaining the quality. So any comments from the school board on that, things we ought to be sort of focused on in the intermediate or longer term to maintain the quality and be responsive to the needs that have emerged recently or that we're looking at.
Ms. Litton, do you want me to answer that?
Why don't you go ahead, and then I'll jump in with anything else I have.
Sure. Well, let me say this just from the jump. I would like to commend our teaching staff and faculty for what they've been able to do through this pandemic, first and foremost. Mm-hmm. They have absolutely modified, adapted, and changed their instructional delivery models now 6 times over the course of the last 12 months, moving from planning for a hybrid and ending up in online, and then to a hybrid and back online, and then to a hybrid and now face-to-face. And through all of it, it's been extremely painful and very exhausting for our staff. But all that being said, as we have looked at our internal data metrics with respect to student achievement, we see that we're not only outpacing the state, but we're also outpacing the United States in student achievement on our assessments, such as the STAR assessment and the like. So if that is a single point of data, it's not enough to draw a major conclusion about. But what I can tell you is that we're not seeing some of the COVID loss that other school divisions are. And I think it's a consequence of a number of things. One is obviously our great teachers. A second is our great community. We have a lot of parents in our community that hold, obviously, education in high esteem, that have been there. We've been providing a lot of structures and opportunity for students that have been struggling and have been able to provide that. So that's one bit of the answer. But what's interesting about your question to me, and I know it was big and broad, Mr. Snyder, but I actually think that the way that the City of Falls Church has handled the pandemic has actually enhanced our brand in the region, in that we have more teachers that are applying for single positions right now than we have in a long time. And the reason for that is that we've been able to be flexible. We've been able to be nimble. We're the first and only division in the greater Northern Virginia region that will be open 5 days a week starting April 6th at the elementary school and 4 days a week at the secondary school with 1 day of asynchronous. Look at Fairfax, look at Arlington, look at Alexandria, look at Loudoun. They are not able to do what we're able to do. So what we see is actually a long-range opportunity for us with respect to not just quality of education, but quality of instructors that we're able to bring in too. We're starting to see larger pools of applicants. So I'm pleased with, obviously this has been a challenge for everyone from top to bottom, but I am seeing, as we come sort of to a new day, as we get more and more of the community vaccinated with less and less COVID a lot of less transmission, some positive things that are coming out of this with respect to our school system. So I feel very, very good about where we are. And I don't think we're losing anything. I think we're actually gaining.
And Peter, I would just echo part of what you said is, at least in my opinion, I think teachers remain key in having high quality teachers and helping them to be, creating an environment where they enjoy teaching and want to be here. So I think we should continue to focus on that. The other piece, class size, I think has always been something that sets us apart. And I think we've been able to maintain that. So continuing to keep an eye on that, I think remains important.
All right, let's move on to other questions. Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Thanks. Shannon, a couple weeks ago in one of the meetings, you guys had made a comment. I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was Dr. Noonan. That once you get into, I think it was learning recovery, that you might need additional funding. What does that look like? And what would that need potentially be?
I'll take that one, Chair Litton.
Okay.
I don't think that I'm not sure how that comment, what the context of that comment was made, but we anticipate that our learning recovery needs will be met through this second or the relief package that's coming. So I don't anticipate that we're going to need any more additional revenue from anywhere to achieve our summer program and our learning recovery programs.
Okay. So Dr. Noonan, while I got you, the one of the biggest concerns I've had, and I know Brian articulated this at the beginning too, and we've talked about it in the past, is the kind of filling the gap of the learning loss over the year through summer school. And I know in our last meeting you had made it clear that would expand this to anyone that wants it or needs it, and it wasn't a funding issue, it was more of a staffing issue. And so your comments just a few minutes ago actually make me feel much more optimistic that you guys will be able to find the teachers and educators that you need if Falls Church has become an even more attractive place to teach because of what we have done differently. Do you think that we'll be able to meet those I think you guys, the human capital needs?
I'm certainly hopeful. I think that we've had some early interest. We also, interestingly enough, we didn't have a lot of our teaching staff that really wanted to necessarily teach in our summer programs, but we do have some emerging leaders that have agreed that they would like to be site-based leaders at our different sites throughout the summer. So part of their work will be recruiting teachers and staff. And each of those folks that we went through the list today have some really great and deep connections with local universities. So I'm optimistic and very hopeful. But again, it will sort of remain to be seen. I think we're going to have to wait. And unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball that can tell me for sure, but I'm very hopeful.
Okay. And then my last question related to summer school. When will parents in the communities find out about what that program is going to look like? Obviously, a lot of folks are, looking at their summer schedules, and I know my family personally has been looking at, educational programs and other camps and things, enrichment camps, but would love to be able to, of course, take advantage of summer school programs for the kids. When do you think that the community at large would find out what this kind of robust summer school program looks like?
Well, thank you, Mr. Lichtenhouse. 2 Fridays ago, we did publish all of the dates for all of the summer programs in the system. And we also did a pretty high level overview of what all the different programs were going to be. But all of the programs are going to start roughly, well, not roughly, but right after the 4th of July. And will run through the end of July. But those dates I don't have right at my fingertips, but they did go out to the entire community 2 weeks ago with information about each of the programs.
Okay, I saw that. I didn't know if there was something different. That was a kind of a 3-week or 3.5-week program. Okay, so that's the
first part of it. And then each of the schools, particularly our secondary schools, are doing jumpstart days and other things where kids are coming in as well.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, I look forward to seeing more about that. But that is encouraging that Falls Church has become an even more attractive place for teachers to come. So, all right. Thanks. That's all I have for now.
All right, Ms. Hardy, followed by Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Noonan, and our school board colleagues. I think as we open with, when we collaborate, we can do great and big things. And I think Mr. Schneider, Mr. Licken has asked all the reopening questions that I had actually listed. But I did want to move on to 2 other broad topics. One is around enrollment numbers. And so this is less of an issue, I think, recently because we've been pretty precise and good at actually predicting enrollment with our mixed-use development, especially in 15 years now doing mixed-use development. But given that this coming year is more unpredictable with not knowing kind of how families are going to react, how are you all going to prepare if, let's say, enrollment becomes higher, and then on the flip side, if enrollment comes lower, what's the plan?
So if it's higher, let me take that one first. If it is higher, we do have a staffing reserve in place that we hold for, and that's approximately the amount of one teacher. We're very small, so if we need to bump around folks during the summer because enrollment's looking differently, we can, and we can add teachers and be flexible that way. But if enrollment comes in exceedingly high, we likely would need to come back to the table and try to figure out how we're going to deal with that. We don't expect that we're going to have extreme spikes in enrollment. We have planned for growth, approximately 101 students more next year than we had this year, based on some preliminary data that we've seen. If we come in low, what we would do is, as necessary, we would look at our staffing models, and we would likely keep those teachers in position for the year and then reduce during the summer, because our budget, the way that it is developed, it rolls from year to year. So we probably would make the adjustment on the backside. We've done that before and have had class sizes just be a little bit lower in certain grade levels.
Got it. And I think the broader question I had raised before when we were discussing the budget for the first time is, I think, when we are past COVID, I would love for us to actually sit down collaboratively, do kind of long-term capacity planning. I think when I first joined council, at this point, 5 or 6 years ago, that's what we did kind of to enable the high school, right? Really look ahead at the next 10 years of what growth in the city looks like and really proactively plan. And so I want to make sure that that's a legacy we can leave for the next school boards and city councils. So we're not trying to do all this catch up again with our facilities, and really think proactively about what the growth of the city looks like. So action item for kind of hopefully when we're on the other side of COVID.
I would love to do that, because we definitely want to know too.
Great. Second question is really around salary competitiveness. I know the WABE report comes out every year, and I remember that we are maybe number 1 or number 2. Is that where we are currently holding as well?
I don't have all of the information from the surrounding jurisdictions with respect to what their proposed budgets are, and certainly don't have what their adopted budgets will be. So if you would give us some time, I'd be happy to go back and pull some of those data and see where we would land if the school boards adopted the proposed budgets as they've been presented, for sure.
And to your earlier comment, maybe, money is certainly part of it, but if there's other things that make Falls Church attractive, and the fact that we are innovative and nimble in responding to crises like COVID, that makes us a more attractive place to work too. So those things, I think those soft factors matter just as much. And while we're on that note, Mr. Shields, if you could take down another question for me is, I would love to know where we are with the general government side in terms of how competitive our salaries are. I think salary competitiveness and parity across general government and schools has always been important to me. So I think when we talk about schools and how we rank, I think we'd love to know how the city ranks as well in terms of our salaries.
Okay, noted. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then the last broad question, which, I started with, when we collaborate, we get great big things done, like the fabulous high school we have. I think equity is really another shared goal across city and schools. And I noted that I think before COVID, I'm not sure whether this has been the case this year, is we used to have tuition paying students. Is that correct?
That is.
So one part of news that I caught today is that Evanston, Illinois, as well as Asheville, North Carolina, and a handful of other cities across the U.S. actually started discussing reparations. And I think over the weekend, I saw a report come out from the state that had recommendations on equity. And one of their key recommendations is actually thinking about how to reconfigure school boundary lines to really promote more integration and advance equity. And clearly, as a city, it's really hard to do that because we really only have one school district. But as I think about kind of the history of Falls Church and where we historically gerrymandered out our historically Black communities, I wonder whether those tuition spots could be opened up actually as scholarship opportunities. Because I do think personally that housing and education are great places for us to open up the doors and address systemic barriers. And so again, not for this budget cycle, but I think these types of ideas are the ones that I would love for us to kind of take on together, because I do think that it's a real opportunity for us to actually move the needle on equity and open up, our great school system to other places.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Hardy. And I would just let you and other council members and anyone who's watching at home know that our school board has had first reading of a really thoughtful and meaningful equity policy that they are planning to adopt at second reading at their next regular meeting. That really speaks to, I think, not just the value of equity in our schools, but also speaks to the how and exactly what some of the actions are that we'll take as a system to ensure equity for our students. And we do have a division level equity team that's led by our new chief academic officer, William Bates, who's doing great work. So we're definitely on the same wavelength with respect to equity.
Great. Yeah, on the how, hopefully we can think about kind of that tuition opportunity. Because I think when we talk about putting money where our mouth is, I certainly would be willing to invest in making sure we create more access for more students, especially parts of the city that used to be Falls Church but weren't. I actually realized I did have one more money question. I think when we were talking about the remaining CARES money, I think the city had remaining $250,000, and I think Mr. Shields had told us that the schools were actually going to put in a request for that. Is that still the case, or do you think you're good right now?
I think that was still the case. We were sort of banking on some of that as potential uses for the summer programming as well.
So, Mr. Shields and Ms. Bawa, is that something that we need to tackle as a separate budget amendment outside of the current FY22 budget process?
Yes.
Okay.
And so that money it is there in the city's coffers, and it's waiting for that type of discussion and any other needs that we might have as we close out that CARES Act funding.
So I guess to add it to like another source of money besides the latest federal money, I guess we need to figure out the rules of how restrictive the federal money is versus the CARES money, and so we can deploy the right money towards the right things. So that would be my request, is rather than just go ahead with doing a budget amendment, is that we at least understand how this money can be used differently than the ARP money.
We can get back with you on that. I think probably the CARES money for anything that you can foresee needing right now is probably the pot of money to use. And the next round of federal money from the America Recovery Plan, as we were discussing earlier, is I think we've got some ways to go before we're actually going to see that money. That's my instincts on it. So I think we'll probably be looking at CARES too, certainly to address the discussion we've just had.
Got it. So in sum, between, I think it was 330 from CARES 1, Dr. Noonan quoted, and then the 250 from kind of the latest round, that's the sum total of what the city would be allocating. Is that correct?
Well, what I was actually talking about is the 250 of CARES funds that have not been allocated. That was what was in my mind when we were talking about that. The money that goes straight to the schools will make decisions on that on their own.
But in terms of what the city,
to your point, yes, it's actually 322 that we received from the council previously, that plus the 250. So that would be a total of what, 472? 572.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A high-level question about employee compensation, really to both of you, Dr. Noonan and Mr. Shields. Maybe Dr. Noonan could start. So if you had told me back when we set budget guidance at 2.5% that you were going to be able to present a budget which gives your employees COLA and STEP additions that are, I think, somewhere in the 4% range, I would have thought, wow, you are some kind of big-time magician. So congratulations. My question is, am I right about that, first? And second, Was there something in particular unusual about this budget year that enabled you to do that? Because I know you've told us that your employee compensation is, an enormous part of your budget. People are, expensive, and I don't believe, if I'm wrong, correct me. I don't believe anybody got a raise in the current fiscal year because of COVID, right? So there's a matter of spreading out what they're getting next year over basically 2 years. I'm trying to figure out how to explain to the average person how we put this budget together, because like I said earlier, I think it's going to be a good budget, and it's going to be able to be carried at a tax rate that is lower, and that's good. But I want to make sure I'm explaining it the right way, and I guess mildly concerned about what we do going forward, because sustaining 4% salary increases is going to be a challenge unless we keep up a very vigorous campaign of economic development and benefit from inflation maybe a little bit, and generally grow our local economy in order to keep pace with our desires to compensate our employees as competitively as we possibly can given our size. So I don't know why it can go second on this, because the city staff is not such a big number. But Dr. Noonan, what's the answer to my questions?
Well, so first of all, I actually believe that we should be doing a step increase for all of our employees every single year, and doing some sort of cost of living adjustment as well, just to continue to grow our salary scale and remain competitive, because everybody else around us is likely doing the same thing. But you are correct that no one did get a compensation increase in this current fiscal year. We had scheduled to have a step increase plus a pretty substantial cost of living adjustment last year. And unfortunately, we weren't able to do it. So how did we do it this year? There were a couple of things that sort of broke for us that were quite positive. One was we saw some state revenues come in slightly higher than we thought they were going to be with respect to sales tax. Sales tax remained very strong in the state of Virginia, even during the pandemic, which was good. And then we also, to utilize Councilmember Lichtenhouse's words, we dug deep. We dug deep into our budget and took some backside cuts of well over $500,000 to also offset any additional cost of living adjustment that we had done. So we were able to realize that step and cost of living adjustment through some additional state revenues and some backside cuts that we took as well, that we didn't think would at all interfere with the quality of educational program that we're offering here in the city of Falls Church. So we feel good about where we are. We think our employees deserve it. And so the total amount that we are looking at doing is, you're right, it's roughly 4%. It's about 2.5% in a step increase and about 1.5% in a COLA. Unfortunately, and this sort of came up prior, is that the governor came out and said that he wanted us to all do a 5% across the board adjustment within this biennium, which would mean that last year, whatever we did last year plus this year, as long as it added to 5%, then we would get some subsidy from the state to help offset some of that cost. Unfortunately, because we weren't able to give any kind of cost of living or step increase last year, the expectation was that we did all 5% in this year of the biennium, and we weren't able to get there. As hard as we tried and as magical as you think I might be with budgets, and I do want to thank Kristen Michael, who's our Chief Operating Officer, and Michelle Kopic, who's our Budget Director, for their work. We weren't able to squeeze 5% out for our employees. Now, the good news is in the final budget that was adopted at the state level, is that if you were able to get somewhere between 2 and 5%, there was some additional revenue from the state that came to help support that. So because we got to 4%, we took a prorated decrease in that 5% that we would have gotten. So we didn't fully realize all of the money that we could have gotten from the state had we done the full 5%. One commitment that I have made to our employees, and this was, and this is part of the revenue sharing agreement that we really look forward to each year, is, you set guidance, and then part of the deal is any additional revenue that falls out of the budget then would be split 50-50 between the schools and the general government. And I did make a commitment to our employees that if there was additional revenue that was realized out of the budget, that would also be poured into compensation. And we've lived by that in our own budget, and we're hopeful that in this budget, in the end, there might be some additional revenues that come from it. So that's where we are. Kristen Michael, our Chief Operating Officer, is on here. Is there anything that you wanted to add that I might have missed?
No, Dr. Noonan, I think you did a great job.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Wyatt, do you want to speak to that question at all?
I will just be brief because we will spend more time on compensation, I'm sure, when we talk about and go deeper on the general government budget in upcoming work sessions. We did set aside, in terms of budget priorities, having compensation for employees was a, kind of a starting point for the budget. Just knowing what, with the freeze for this year and with the vacancies, how much work all of our employees are doing. We really felt that was crucial in the budget, and so that is something that it was also the largest single item in the budget on the general government side as well. But we'll go into more detail in terms of what other jurisdictions are doing on compensation and how we're maintaining competitiveness for our workforce, and also on how we've tried to address some of the pay equity issues just in the current fiscal year, also with some adjustments for our frontline DPW operations staff and Rec and Parks custodial staff, where we had some adjustments that we carried out this year, which we'll describe in more detail as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right, looks like we've got another hand up. I'm trying to figure out whose it is. Let me just see if I can scroll down here. Mr. Snyder?
Sure, thanks. So the Police Review Commission had some recommendations that I think may relate to the schools. And I'm wondering if the schools had any comments about that. I think, do the schools plan to maintain the school resource officer, the SRO? And is there, and talking to one of the members of that committee, the clarity that it is important between what the police officer who's the SRO does versus school discipline. Any comments generically about the Police Review Commission suggestions, how they relate to the schools, and how we're doing?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that briefly. First and foremost, I want to thank Sevi Padilla, who was our Director of Facilities and Safety, for sitting on that committee and representing the schools. So we did have representation there, which was really good. Clark Gagnon is our current SRO at our high school, and he's certainly part of our community, and the kids know him, and he's been really excellent for us. That being said, we have an older memorandum of understanding with the police department that hasn't been revised in several years. So one of the things that Chief Gavin and I have talked about is going back and revisiting and revising as necessary the school resource officer memorandum of understanding that would incorporate some of those items that you referenced that came up with respect to that committee. I will say, having worked in schools with school resource officers as an administrator since 1999, the relationship and how that is defined and how that is documented, as you said, is very important. And we don't want to be in a position where we're deputizing for example, a school resource officer as a school administrator, but instead the school administration leads all of our investigations and then brings in the police after. So there are really sort of two ways that it's probably much more detailed than you asked for, Mr. Snyder, and I'll stop here in a second because of the late hour, but there really are two ways that school resource officers work. Either you deputize essentially and say you're one of the school administrators, you can do whatever you want, or you say, hey, this is our school, we're the school administrators, we'll bring you in as we need you. And I think Chief Gavin and I have agreed and have always worked sort of under the premise that, and this is, I believe, the way the MOU is currently structured, that the school resource officer is there simply as a resource, but does it through a community policing opportunity. And so I would anticipate that we would land somewhere in that same place. But we do like having our school resource officer there to really help, not necessarily in moments of crisis, but is available in a moment of crisis, but really to put a face to a uniform and to help our students really understand that, in many cases, in most cases, our police are helpful. So it's nice having them there.
Okay, so I'm glad to hear there's no thought about eliminating the SRO. I think we've been reminded most recently from Boulder, Colorado, that mass shootings are still occurring. So having that school resource officer, I've always thought was critically important, but I think also important is the relationship and the function. So thanks for that discussion. Again, it was raised to me by one of our citizens who served on it as one of the important things to come out of that report, one among many. So thanks a lot for that very thorough response and the work that, others have said it, but let me just add that it's a lot of work to produce a good education system. So I thank everybody involved in that.
All right, thank you. I don't see any hands raised. Looks like there is one now. Mr. Snyder, did you raise your hand again, or is that just lingering? Maybe lingering.
I just lowered it. Thank you very much, Mr.
Okay,
Mayor.
Vice Mayor Conley.
This is just a quick request, and hopefully it seems like this conversation is winding down, and I'd just like to wrap it up with a request that as the money from the federal government comes in, and as we are more aware of how it's going, that there be a working group between the schools and the general government to talk about our priorities for the allocation of that funding. We had several requests tonight in public comment that we didn't even ask for, people coming up with great ideas of how we could spend that money. So I do feel like as a team, we need to sit down and lay out some guardrails and some priorities and some goals about what we'd like to be able to do with that funding for the benefit of the whole city. So I hope that others would be interested in participating in such a group, and if staff could organize that, that'd be very good.
All right, other comments, questions? If not, I guess I want to thank all our colleagues from the school board for sticking around and speaking with us and sharing the great work that you're doing. So thank you all for coming out this evening. I would say to you all, you're free to leave. We don't really have much more to do on council here. If there are any council requests, now would be the time to make it, or any comments council members want to make about standing commissions, committee meets, liaison reports, etc. Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Economic Development Committee is scheduled to meet this Thursday at 1 o'clock. Among the items on the agenda are staff report with new information on the net fiscal impact of the developments we've done here over the last 20 years. That should be interesting. We're taking a snapshot at the time, which includes the COVID trough. So it'll be interesting to see what the numbers show. Also, in the same sort of vein, the clerk sent around a link to the video of our last EDC meeting with a time marker, I think at an hour and a half in, where there's a 20-minute discussion of the development review process is being tested, I guess is the word to use, on the Founders Row Phase 2, and also I think perhaps the Atlantic proposal. There was some discussion at one of our recent council meetings about that development review process. It might, if you have time, and it only is about 20 minutes long, to click and listen to that. It would help explain the discussion that we had about that process in the last EDC meeting. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Mr. Snyder?
Sure, two quick things. The metro budget, I want folks to understand that we, the city, and I guess me in particular, have been very clear about the notion of closing down East Falls Church Metro Station or West Falls Church Metro Station as a non-starter, and that fortunately there was federal money, but even if there wasn't, that would not be an acceptable way to meet the financial demand. The second point is I would like a discussion before the Council of Government Board of Directors meeting next month about DC statehood, so that I carry forward the council's desires in that area, as well as any questions that might arise with respect to regional cooperative arrangements and whether that would impact those at all. I don't think so, but anyway, what I would like is for the council to discuss it and provide the city's position that then I can.
Thank you. Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. So in addition to my request about following up with the neighbors from Lincoln, I had two things. One is reopening plans. I think we briefly discussed it in the mayor's meeting, but I do feel like it's probably worth a work session topic. So just like if our numbers hold and vaccinations continue to improve, I feel like we need to have a plan forward on how we might reopen city government and meetings and whatnot, and not just kind of flip the switch. So maybe we could schedule that for an upcoming work session. And then, Mayor, in response to kind of you were mentioning at the beginning that Dan Z's birthday would be the end of this week, I think we want to pull back off the back burner our memorial event. I think the Urban Forestry Commission talked about a tree planting thing. I think the clerk's been working on the city plaque on City Hall, so I think it's worth planning for something and just getting on the calendar before another year slips by.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Is there any other business we need to take account of tonight before we adjourn? All right, if not, again, thank you to our school colleagues for joining us and sticking around and for the great work you all do. And to the rest of my colleagues, let's all say goodnight and have a safe and healthy rest of the week. So thank you all.
All right, thank you very much. Good night.
Good night, everybody.